This is LS, and you're on Thorin's YouTube channel, so cut the Western shit.
Okay, this is going to be episode 44 of Narrative Wake. And as the immortal philosopher Tupac once said, Kelsey, my 4-4 going to make sure none of your kids grow. Now, as far as I know, you don't have children. You may never have children. Who knows? You're married to League of Legends. That's your one true love. And I hope you never desert it, and I hope it never betrays you, quite frankly. But kind of a weird intro, but you know, standard by now, right?
Yeah, I mean, I just accept it. Most of the time, I just tune it out. I think to myself, okay, just let him have his run. People will laugh. It'll be a good time, you know? Yeah.
Similar relationship on our side. Not the laugh part, obviously. But anyway, right?
But the tuning out, obviously.
Yes.
Which is why
that goes without saying, yeah.
We often fail to play off of each other because we don't ever listen to what the other is saying anyway, so it's all good.
Yeah, I agree with whatever you said. No, because one of the problems, actually, I've noticed this is actually a real problem on talk shows, you know, is that when someone's making a really long point, it might be a really good point as well. The problem is, if the other person doesn't plan on responding to that, they do tend to tune out. I've noticed it's just the default move. That's why actually the best moments on every talk show is just when people argue, because then they're like either vaguely listening or they're like, there's a bit of back and forth, you know. Sadly, we haven't actually had many of those, I've noticed on Narrative Wake. Like a lot of the guests come on, they just answer the questions, we give them time to talk. It's not like the old days where we just had like St. Vicious fucking getting progressively more drunk, just berating me about some stupid shit, and then at the end just saying he was trolling. Classic times, missed those days.
Even when there are disagreements, it's kind of like passive aggressive, you know? It's like the guest will say something like, I agree with you, but you're wrong, or something like this. Yeah, it's very odd. So we'll see if that happens today.
Yeah. I mean, not all of them have learned your tact, Kelsey, of just waiting for someone to make a really long, well thought out, established point and then just say, not sure I agree, and then just make your point anyway. Like, that is one way to solve the problem. I agree. You've diffused it successfully.
There you go.
Yeah. So, okay, our guests for this episode, obviously, we had to get two of Europe's premier junglers. So, no, obviously, we got people who aren't in the playoffs at the moment because people are in the playoffs. Sadly, that's the world that we're in nowadays in the LCS. You can't get people who are in the playoffs. Like, they're not going to come on. If they would, they wouldn't say anything interesting anyway. So I thought we'd get some players who aren't in the playoffs. They can talk freely. They can, obviously, I mean, luckily, they can probably actually be critical because they hate all the teams in the playoffs because they're so good and they beat their teams so often. You know, we might get some real opinions out of them. So our guests for this episode, in the bottom right-hand corner, we've got Kold, who, not really that catchy a name, also hasn't done that much as Kold to really sort of establish himself. So maybe you know him better by his name Trashy, when he used to play for the team that obviously was previously the Splyce team, the Danish lineup that went to Worlds. Now, obviously, you've named yourself wrong. I don't know if the names are ironic here, Kold, because the thing is, when you were called Trashy, you were pretty good as a jungler. In fact, if anything, you were cold in sort of like the American rap sense of like, damn, that brother Kold. Whereas now, some would say you're Trashy, but now you've called yourself Kold. It's like, I can't, thematically, you're all off.
I mean, I don't know what kind of world you live in, but I don't think I was very good when I was Trashy. So
really?
Yeah, definitely. I think the competition was just way worse, honestly.
Right. The classic EU
you know, the real question is if you even watched me play this year, because I think
sure.
This year I probably played the best I've ever done in a year, in my opinion.
Right. So it's just your teammates that really fucking suck.
To be fair, all you need to do to look good as an EU jungler is gank mid, so you've got that in spades. We're good to go.
What I do want to say, though, is that regarding to the name change, I'm quite happy with how it went because the name is way more appealing to me. So there was a lot of thought behind it, and it turned out the way I wanted it. Obviously, I can hear that you don't watch too much EU LCS, which is fair, you know. I can understand. There are some games.
I just don't watch the bottom teams that much.
Exactly. I mean, I don't blame you, you know. Like some of the games are absolutely terrible, but, you know, that's the world we live in.
That's how he can still have me on the show. He just avoids watching the bottom teams, so he doesn't know the transgressions that H2K.
I don't even think Kelsey's done anything egregious as far as I can tell. She's a brilliant analyst, so So listen, Kold, like banter's one thing, but let's not pierce the veil of civility around all of the teams that you're involved in. That they haven't done very well. Okay, let's keep it nice and light. Let's keep it friendly. Let's not get don't go too deep on that already.
I see. I mean, you asked for it yourself, so.
No, I think it's good. Let's go. We can go. Okay.
He's just taking the cues from the intro where we said we didn't have enough back and forth, not enough arguments.
I like it. I mean, I just don't know whether it's going to carry on and still continue, and we have to talk about how underwhelming Senclux is. But let's see. Maybe we will. Let's have a look.
I have too little.
I'm looking forward to the episode already.
I have too little shit on you to keep it going. Like I know at some point I will just have to bend over and take it, and that's going to be bad. So. Yeah.
But enough about life as a Unicorns Love player. So, right, our other guest is going to be someone else who made a change, but he actually made a role swap. So it's Caedrel. Now, here's the thing, Caedrel. I don't blame you for your problems in the LCS. You're from the UK, mate. We've only had 2 players who were vaguely good in the LCS era. Because if everyone remembers, Snoopy was definitely washed up by the time the LCS started. So he doesn't count. He was washed up. And then he went to NA and quite frankly made an absolute fucking disgrace of himself. Just literally, may as well have just appeared on camera eating money, just shitting across the desk. Like, wasn't doing anything of value there. The only 2 players I was referring to, obviously, that were good, was Freddy122, who was definitely a very good player. I have a lot of respect for him now. Maybe not such a great coach. We'll see on that one. Done some alright work, I guess. Made some bad teams decent. And then obviously we have Kasing, who I used to wonder about Kasing, because I always thought skill-wise he had the ability to be like the best support. But then if you actually look at his personality, where he just laughs every 5 seconds, like some sort of toy you give to a child with a button on the back, I think I understand why he didn't take his career seriously enough now. I think he just doesn't take life seriously enough. So unless he's on some next level Buddhism where he just realizes life is but a joke. Never really got why that was. So here's the thing, Caedrel, you could still go for #1 here, mate. You could still shoot for the top spot.
Yeah, I'm surprised you went for Kasing and
instead of Maxwell and Alfari.
Instead of Maxwell or Alfari.
I was expecting Maxwell and Alfari as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Almost taking down SKT in the best of 5.
They're too new. I don't know if I count them. Also,
to be fair, that is a gigantic. That's like it's something that gets thrown out a lot. It's like almost take down SKT in a best of 5, but we've seen the slow decline of SKT.
SKT, that's true actually, but it's a really good achievement, I think.
Sure. Also,
but they should have won.
There is no almost. Let's be real. You still lost. Like that's not it's not actually an accomplishment to almost do something. It's like, oh, I almost made it to the top of Mount Everest. What happened then? Died. All right, well,
never mind.
Yes. Yeah.
I told myself that twice this year. I was like, I should have made playoffs. I almost made playoffs, but I didn't make it. Playoffs. It's absolute shit. But yeah, that's a different story.
Okay. Right, Caedrel, give us some thoughts here on your role swap, right? Because obviously people were pretty harsh on you when you were a mid laner. You made the swap to jungle. I can't necessarily judge what happened in this team because obviously this team was up and down, changing rosters, bringing in different players. Both lineups in the end had bad performances, so it's not as though it was just one group sucked and the other was great. Give us some thoughts on the role swap, why you did it, how you think it's worked out.
Yeah, it was something I was thinking about for months and months before we qualified for LCS with Schalke the year before, because I enjoyed it so much, and I was like, I found revitalized when I was playing the role in solo queue, so I was just playing it a lot. And then when I actually did decide to role swap, and I had the chance to play on the weekend, you can ask Kelsey how terrible I was. We had one scrim set, I think it was against Vitality, and we perfect gamed them 2 games, and I was like, holy shit, I'm so good at jungle. It's gonna be 3 wins from the rest from now on, And then we just got really hard stomped, and I was just trolling. But then when I actually took time away and practiced, I think I got really good at it, and I think it showed in the LCS in the last few weeks, hopefully.
Okay. Right, so obviously we're here to discuss the EU LCS playoffs. We're into the semi-finals already. So let's get some thoughts, first of all, on the matches we've already seen, and then we'll tie those teams into how the team might do in the playoffs, who they're going to do in the semi-finals. So the best series was obviously the Schalke versus Splyce series, and this is one where the Schalke players, like I always mention, on paper, they have a load of established names. They have names who've been star players before. People are familiar with a lot of these names. Splyce, on the other hand, okay, they did well in the spring split. Didn't do so well at Rift Rivals, etc. But we forget about that. That didn't exist. That didn't happen. So what did you think about this series called the Splyce versus Schalke one?
So I think initially it's good to take that approach of like what was actually the expectations of the series.
Sure.
And my expectations of the series was a very, very clean series from Schalke side. Like I expected them to either 3-0 or 3-1 in very convincing fashion. Because from what I've seen from Splyce in the regular season, I think I don't know. Whenever I see them play or play against them, it's like I think the best way to describe them is like you go out on a night with your mates and you have this one guy in your group and he's like he's getting pumped up, you know. He's like, I'm gonna slay some girls on the club, you know.
Yes.
I'm gonna go in, you know, and
Hype,
when yeah, exactly. And then you hit the club, you get a table, and
he's not talking to anyone.
He just proceeds to sit at the table for the next 5 hours with talking with the same guy, doing nothing, and you're like, so bro, come on, like, let's get going, you know, like, and just nothing happens. Proceeds to just have no creativity, no nothing, honestly. So especially in the early stage of the game, I'm so confused at what they actually have like planned for their games. Obviously, there's like one or few games in the split where they play like a decent early game and they look like somewhat of a team. But there's too many games where they just look clueless and don't do anything. And that's my biggest concern with them going into the series. Then for the series specifically, they actually changed a lot. They were actually the team being proactive in the early game. A lot of it comes down from Cersei and around the mid lane, and I think that was why the series was close, because Schalke didn't really have a lot of answers. A lot of things for me from Schalke side was just they didn't do much in the early stage and didn't challenge it at all, and that's why for me the series got close.
Okay, what do you think, Kelsey?
Yeah, so I think for the most part, I kind of agree, but I also think that a lot of it has to do with the way that Schalke play to set up. They often go for like really defensive side lanes, which really limits the play that the jungler can make unless it's around mid. And then often I think that Amazing just kind of plays to weak side. Like he looks to repeatedly gank when his side lane is pushed in or something like this, which is really, really difficult to pull off if the enemy laner is just like really far ahead or you don't have tempo on that side. You can't necessarily get anything if the enemy tries to trade for the other side. So it's just a really weird, questionable setup and approach that the team in general has. I think that part of the reason Splyce also managed to do well in the series is because they really went for an approach that had way more to do with like pushing out sides or like making more plays that abused the fact that Schalke relies so heavily on mid matchups. So like they went for more unconventional counter picks or anything like this. And so that really shut down the one opening that Schalke tend to have early on, which is through mid. So.
Okay. Caedrel, did you actually think that Splyce had a chance coming in this series?
I mean, the thing is, we faced Schalke the week before and we beat them. And when we played against them, I didn't think that they were that good. It felt like I was playing against a team that was just doing nothing and you could just do whatever you wanted. So, I mean, that's only one game, but I thought that it was going to be really close. I really thought Splyce was probably going to win because, I mean, I just thought they were just going to be a better team in general. But yeah, I mean, Schalke played pretty well. Like they came up with this sort of like get nuked like ahead, put him on a side lane strat, and it worked really, really well. And they always had like a safe bot lane and a tank top, and their drafts were pretty good, I think.
Okay. Right, Kelsey, this is something we actually addressed. I think it was maybe like the second to last episode we did about EU, which is that the Schalke team, one of their issues, despite having good players, was like lack of decisiveness or just like doing nothing at certain points in the game. How are they actually succeeding as a team then? Because obviously they had a nice run towards the end of the split. They've won this match here. They're top 4 already. What have the strengths of Schalke been?
Well, for a while, no one banned Sejuani against them, so that was the thing.
Number one mistake.
But yeah, with Sejuani, it's really safe to just like clear and not necessarily contest as many objectives, and then still like level 6 comes around, you win a lot of 1v1s anyway. So I think that was helping them a lot. And with Sejuani denied, their finding their feet in different ways. They're relying way more on players like Upset to just kind of like, I think one really big thing that has helped Schalke a lot, and especially in this series, is that it's really fashionable to do 3 tanks, right? So you just draft like a Kai'Sa or a Vayne or something like this, and then so you get behind, you just blow up the enemy team at a certain point. So I think that has helped them a lot, and they can really kind of work on that strategy and use Kai'Sa to make that happen in the mid to late game.
I also just want to point out that a lot of their success, at least in the quarterfinal, was purely off Upset, and I think it's fair to say that he has made like huge improvement over this year, because if we look back at like spring, when there was discussion about Upset, it was always that he was like a prodigy and he has the talent to become like one of the best ADCs in Europe, but he would always actually make more mistakes in the later parts of the game than making good plays. And I think in this series it showed that he mentally was at a better place. Like he was still going for the big plays, but they were actually succeeding. And I think that's like a huge thing going forward for him as a player, because I mean, any player out there knows that there are a lot of good players out there that can make solid plays, make average plays, but to become like a great player, which I think he might become in the future if he keeps growing like this, you need to be able to make these plays. We see these plays from players like Reckless in the later stage of the game consistently, where he just wins team fights because he knows exactly how to put out the most damage, and that's what we saw from Upset. So I think a lot of praise towards him in the series. I think he was really the backbone of the team in the quarterfinal.
Sure. Yeah, maybe earlier on he had a little bit too much of the Wu light in him, where it's like, you know, whenever you hear someone talk about like making a player being decisive, that's always billed as a good thing. But like, if you've actually got terrible decision making, maybe don't make players, don't do those things. Leave those to the people who know what they're doing.
I also think,
as evidenced by his career.
I also think Upset was someone who was, because if you watch him in Challenger Series, he did better, and then obviously Caedrel has played with him before, so then he would play like pretty well in online matches, but then he would get to stage, and I feel like he was a player who's really overcome by a lot of stage issues, and a lot of players have talked about this, and so it just took him like much of this year to get to a point where he could kind of bring his online performances to a stage setting.
Yeah, I definitely saw that.
Right, give us some insight then, Caedrel, as a teammate. What was Upset like?
I mean, he's one of the funniest guys. Like he always jokes about everything, and if you lose, he'll just make a joke of it, like in a passive-aggressive way. He'll just make a really funny joke of it. But yeah, like online games, he was playing really good, and you could always see, like, even if he would play really well, he would not want to go over the replay fully as a team. He would always want to check what he could have done better first. So, like, we always waited like 10 minutes to do replays and stuff, and he was always checking what he can do better. And when it came to stage, you could notice his performance dropped a bit, because Upset in scrims was like a leader almost. Like when it got to like 15 to 20 minutes in the game on scrims and on online games, he was really like telling everyone what to do, and or like saying what we should do and making calls. But when it came to stage, like that kind of faded out a bit, and he was really focused on his own performance, and we were a bit more lost on stage. But we had like 19 games, I think, in 3 weeks for promotion. So he really like shook that off after the first week or two.
Okay. Were you going to say something, Kold?
I just wanted to bring up like a completely different point about the series, which was Kelsey brought up that the side lanes for Schalke was, I don't know if you meant that they're drafting early game weak side lanes, or because from what I saw in the series, it actually came down to the fact that Schalke actually had better side lanes throughout, especially in the later stages of the series.
You mean the players, or?
Huh?
You mean player-wise, or?
Just the way they drafted.
Okay.
What happened was that in this series, Oramne would play, like for example, the last game he was played in Gnar, where he goes this full damage Gnar build, and which I think was a big mistake, honestly. Just general drafting that when the enemy team has a Ryze on the team, because Ryze, I know Caedrel probably knows as well that when he played mid lane, played Ryze, if you go Ryze against the Gnar on side lane, the Gnar can't do anything. So I think there was like some huge mistakes in the draft from Splyce overall, especially in the game 5. I think the draft was pretty terrible. So a lot of critique, at least towards the staff of Splyce in the series of the adaptation, because the exact same thing happened in game 1, and they just let that happen in game 5 again. And I think that is something that cannot happen, honestly, in a series that has so much matter than this one.
I think one big thing that a lot of people overlook in commentary when they talk about which teams win mid to late, if you have a champion like Ryze and then the enemy team can't answer it inside, then even if you have a better team fight, a lot of times your late game will be worse, you know. So
I mean, it's just a clear win condition that you can always play around. And but so the reason why I bring this up is because in the other quarterfinal, like, there was a clear adaptation from Misfits when they saw this, how they played around it, and I think they had way better adaptation towards the Ryze pick than Splyce had. So I think it's important to bring out that, in my opinion, that drafting from Splyce was just not optimal at all in the series.
When you consider that, obviously, from his time in H2K, Odoamne is one of those people where, because that team had it wasn't even a meme, it was just like a theme of their team that they choked in big matches, etc., and they lost like more big matches than they won when it was the one that's really mattered. This game 5 really hurts if you're Odoamne. Like, that just makes that legacy look like you were part of it, because like he looked pretty terrible from the layman's perspective in this last game, right?
Maybe he was like back in the day when we played, I think it was 2016 in the semifinals, and he was playing. There was the Gnar against GP matchup, and we on Splyce back then had the Gnar. Maybe he was like, game 5, it's Gnar time, baby, let's go. Yeah. It's my time to be the Gnar, win the game. Maybe that came down to him. He was like just the thought coming down from the heaven, and he was like, this has to be my time to shine, but proceeds to go 0-7. Not sure. To be completely honest, like, I think a guy like him with the experience he has, he needs to be a guy that steps up in games like this and actually puts up good performances, and he obviously didn't. So it's always easy to judge from the outside that you just played like shit or you didn't perform. There's probably more to it, honestly. I would love to hear from himself, like what went through his head in the series, but we can only judge from what we've seen, and he was definitely not the guy to carry the team, that's for sure. Maybe the other team.
I mean, POV stream has been cursed all split, obviously, so there you go. The clear reason. I think one person won in a POV streamed game this split. I can't remember. Okay. But it's actually kind of interesting.
There's a funny story with the POV stream. Like, for example, in the third, fourth place match in Copenhagen, I got to know. So I was on the analyst desk, and I got to know that the POV stream was on Jisuke. So I met Jisuke in the hallway, and I was like, "What's up, man? Did you know that you're on the POV stream?" And apparently he didn't know, because his team didn't want to tell him. So it didn't get to him head. Done. And then I was like, "Fuck, man! I don't know what have I done, And I remember meeting Yamato a couple minutes after, and he sent me like the eyes of death. I don't know I didn't know what to do, but I talked with him after, and it was all cool. But I think there's maybe some mental towards the PoE stream. Sadly, they don't send the PoE stream towards the lower team, so I don't know. Like, I haven't tried it myself. Maybe that's something I'd want to do for next.
Basically, you're just calling it out. Put the POV stream on you, and you'll make a fucking show.
Exactly.
There we go.
Yeah.
But it must be pretty nerve-wracking having like a direct POV of what you're doing, because if you like miss one thing or miss one CS, it must be so embarrassing, actually.
Here's the thing, Caedrel. In the context that obviously most pro league games don't go like that, they go where the action is, they don't watch everything you do. I agree with you. In that context, it must be nerve-wracking. But you are just experiencing what people in all normal esports experience every second of their life, where you can just go watch the demo and see all the mistakes they make. Like sadly, if you make a big mistake in like Counter-Strike, someone can just go get that clip and make like exactly what you did and just show like, you whiffed the kill. Or probably the funniest one ever, if you haven't ever seen this, is, I can't even remember the name of the video, but it'll be on YouTube for sure. There was a video that someone made of the female pros in CS playing, and obviously they found like the worst clips of them, you know, like they found really egregious ones, but some of them were beyond egregious. Like some of the misplays they made were like I've never seen a pro do this ever. So in Counter-Strike, if you're not aware, one of the interactions with the grenades is if someone throws a Molotov, which is the one that sets the floor on fire, if you just throw a smoke grenade into it, the smoke puts the fire out. So it's a classic interaction that if you get Molotov, say, into a corner and running out would mean you die from the losing health, you throw your smoke grenade and you put it out. Unfortunately, there was a female player on mid in Mirage at the window, which is a very famous spot to Molotov, and she got Molotoved in the corner, and for whatever reason, she had a brain fart, and she just pulled out a grenade and threw it at her feet and died. And like, even the commentators watching this clip are like, you could tell they're trying. They know that like if they like go too hard, they're probably going to end up getting called misogynist. So like, they're doing their absolute best to sort of like minorly laugh, but not be too critical. Whereas like, listen, it's not a good look. I'm just telling you, like, it ain't a good look.
Yeah, I can imagine.
I think part of the Game 5 thing also was, or just the series also, is that it's kind of interesting because there were certain games like Game 1 where I don't necessarily expect Schalke to put pressure on the top side, even though like the Maokai versus Gnar matchup isn't that bad for Maokai, as you might think. I would expect, because you have like the Shen Kaisa into the Braum, like that you would go more towards bot. And so I think there were a lot of instances where, again, Amazing was kind of playing around the wrong side, and maybe that also really threw Odomna off. And in the Gnar Poppy matchup, he may have been thinking, oh, okay, like Gnar into Poppy, that's really easy. But at the same time, I feel like the strengths of Poppy that Schalke use have almost nothing to do with the lane matchup. They have way more to do with like objective control. So like, I don't necessarily think Schalke's setups around objectives are that good, but Poppy can deny a lot of control and give you a lot of presence in fights, or an ability to secure objectives that you might not necessarily have otherwise. So I think that maybe this kind of got into his head, and he was thinking, okay, he'll probably take the Poppy into Gnar matchup and I can win that. And then to an extent, he was just really thrown off by the overall dynamic and ended up going 0-7, so it's whatever.
Right, Caedrel, obviously coming into this series, one of the players that was hyped was Nukeduck, because obviously he's like the biggest name in the team. He has been having a very good split. But I actually thought it was very interesting in this series, because considering Splyce lost, it seemed like Niski had a very good series, actually. Like, what did you think of this, the mid lane aspect?
I remember one game he had which was extremely good, which was the Cassio game, I think, where he played team fights really well. And he actually played a pretty rough matchup into LeBlanc, which is like, I thought was a pretty rough matchup for Cassiopeia, but he actually played pretty well. And he got to rise a few times and played pretty well. And he was like carrying through the early game and always with his jungler playing the 2v2 well. But
2v1, mate.
The 2v1, yeah. 2v1. But yeah, no, I think Niski was playing really well. But I also think Nukeduck was like, on some games he was playing really well in team fights. In other games he was just farming up on the side lane and just getting a lead that way, and then just pushing it down the side lane until he dies, and then he just kills everyone and just takes towers. And it worked really well, the split push, and both team fighting went really well for both teams, I think. But I think both mid laners played pretty well overall.
Okay. What do you think of Niski, Kold? Because obviously he's someone where, like, he's never been a huge name. At times people have been harsh on him. What do you think of him as an actual player?
I think he's actually a very solid player. Like, from watching him, I had the pleasure of watching him live in Copenhagen as well. And it really seems like when the games matter, he finds like a new level. I think also looking back at when he played in Envy, when he played this series, I think there was the quarterfinal against TSM where he was also having like maybe the games of his life. And it really seems like that he just finds a new level when the playoffs comes around. So I think he's very solid. It seems like he knows how to utilize his leads well. Like when he gets a lead, he utilizes it well, using it to get another lane ahead, stuff like this. So generally, he seems smart about the game. He seems like a solid kind of mid laner that you pretty much can plug and play in most teams. Like I don't think he has like glaring weaknesses that I have seen at least. So overall, solid. Yeah.
Right, Kelsey, normally I am someone who thinks like you should judge how good a player is, like, you know, every game they play. Like you should just take an aggregate of all the games. So for example, someone can be an amazing player in the regular split and maybe they have a bad playoff series. But it does seem like, in line with what Kold was saying here, like the meme about like there being a playoff buff and it seems accurate. It seems like he looks better when he plays in the playoffs. What do you think?
I think to an extent that's also correct, but I do think that Niski's greatest strength in regular season, just to kind of highlight that, is finding picks or finding like turnaround points. So he might not necessarily do the best in lane during regular season, but he'll play like the Zoe, he'll play something like this that finds a pick and turns the game around from that perspective. So maybe it's just, I would think actually like the playoffs buff for Niski, at least in Splyce, I didn't watch him as much on Envy. It has more to do with how Xerxes is playing, because I think like they focus more on the mid lane 2v2 in playoffs, generally speaking, than they do in the regular season. A lot more of the regular season is Xerxes going like top defensively, or Xerxes looking for something to happen around bot and then that not happening, or Xerxes just like farming super safe and trying to match in teamfights or something like this. But their 2v2 in playoffs, I think, was way better than we've seen most of the regular season. So.
Right, Caedrel, I want to ask you about these junglers, but first of all, let me just set up this context so you don't get confused or worried about being able to be too critical, okay? Because you might think to yourself, well, I'm not one of the best junglers myself yet, so I probably shouldn't be too critical of these guys. You know, some of them are experienced. But here's the thing, okay? What made me think about this topic and how to explain it is that this week we had that situation happen where obviously G2 thought they were going to be in the semi-finals and the final probably, right? And so they'd hyped up that they had a special Spanish-themed jersey that Ocelot was having made because obviously Spain is his native country, the finals are in Madrid, you know, everything made sense, and obviously it was logical they were going to make it there. Now, since they didn't make it, a lot of people, understandably, used that to make fun of G2 and to make fun of Ocelot, like, haha, you know, where's the shirt? Now, among the people who made fun of them, the H2K Twitter account, which, remember, by the way, has a long history of memes and stuff, you know, I have a pretty good social media account, dared to make fun of them, right? And this has to be probably the consensus worst take I have ever seen in the history of League of Legends, which was that everyone went mental at the H2K account and was like, how dare you meme? Your team was shit. It's like, first of all, memeing has nothing to do with the person's level. Like, you know what? I'll call him out right now. One of the people who was outraged at the H2K account was Broken Shard. Now, Broken Shard, if you have to perform very well in an LCS split to talk shit about people, you should appear to basically be mute to us. We should never know that you ever can actually speak. Because what did you, like, by your logic, you can't even meme the red buff. Do you like it when people bring up the red buff every time? Well, that's the world you are inciting by doing stupid shit like getting mad at the H2K account. So the point I'm making here, Caedrel, is you could be the worst jungler ever, but if these guys played bad in the series or you think they're overrated or they had issues, then don't hold back from telling us. And also, these guys are just talkers anyway, mate. I wouldn't worry about anything happening. So the first question is this. Do you remember earlier in the split where for funsies, they asked a bunch of players who the worst player in the LCS was? And I can tell you, Caedrel, the consensus among the players they asked was amazing, which is obviously in stark contrast to how amazing himself views his own game, because he always thinks he is amazing. So tell me, Caedrel, what do you think of amazing? Because obviously his team won the series here. He's got some good play. Has he had issues?
I mean, just to start off from like solo queue at least, he's like Diamond 2 in solo queue, and he just ints every solo queue game I play against him if I ever get him somehow. And okay. I think that his mechanics are really terrible. So that's like the main point, I think so. And then when it comes to Sage games, like I've only played him once and we never really scrimmed Schalke. But from everyone's opinions of telling me, apparently he's really bad. But obviously he's helped Schalke get better somehow because they finished top 4 in the regular split and they finished bottom 3 in the spring split. So something must have changed. And he must have done something to help them, obviously. So I guess I could give him credit there. So he's like a good leader and he can help people out in replays and stuff and get them better at the game. But as far as I can see, his mechanics are really bad. When I played against him, I wasn't like impressed at all. And everyone's opinion of him is, yeah, he's not the greatest.
I just wanna say that we actually do have 2 good junglers on the show, in my opinion. Like the Unicorns of Love and H2 Gaming may not have done that well, but I actually think that we have like both Kold and Caedrel are very strong junglers in their own right. So
beautiful words.
Pandering segment
Can
we just cut
and yes,
we'll
now return to the real brutal analysis for which the show was famous. So,
but it's true. Like you can banter and stuff, and I'm just like clarifying as well because I do think it's important to have like takes that are solid on the show. So yeah.
But also going back to Amazing, I think that the meta really benefits him now. Like you just pick a tank and you just scale a bit and get some objectives here and there. But at the start of the split, there was like the Graves, Kindred, Camille and stuff. And when I watched the games when he played on those champs, it hurt my eyes a bit. But when the tanks came back and Sejuani became meta, like Amazing got better like in general.
Well, being able to pick Gragas has basically been his fucking actual occupation for the last 2.5 years anyway. It wasn't even being a League of Legends player, he was just a Gragas player about it, as far as I can tell. So, right, Kold,
are you talking about me now or what?
As we all know, I don't watch show games. I don't know what the fuck you play.
I got the joke. It's good. It's good.
Exactly.
There you go.
All I know that you play, as far as I can tell, mate, all you play is the losing Game of Thrones political intrigue. Because every other person who used to be in Splyce ended up on a fucking good team. You're just
I mean, obviously, I was the
you
bad
weren't
player on the
ruthless
team.
enough.
I was the guy holding the rest back. I mean, we can go on, you know.
I mean, I think that was the bot lane personally, but enough about that. Right? Anyway,
the Gragas one trick joke was solid. It's okay.
Kold.
Gragas
you were suspiciously quiet during that whole segment about Amazingness. So come on, what do you think?
I mean, I think it's always good to start with the positives. So I think on certain champions, he knows what he's doing, and he has impact on the game positively for his team. Champs like Sejuani, I think he plays decent on Gragas. Could work a little bit on the combos. I think he could probably watch some of my replays and see what I'm doing, because my combos are a bit cleaner. And then to the negatives. I mean, from watching the series in the quarterfinal, like, I think his overall understanding of what to do in the early game, surely you can talk about mechanics and you can talk about micro stuff, but honestly, from a jungle point of view, a lot of the decisions that are made have nothing to do with how good you are on a mechanical level, because if you play smart and you know what you're doing and you know the conditions to win the game, a lot of times you can end up like not hitting a champion for 10 minutes and win the game, which to some extent sound weird, but that's just the reality of League of Legends. But for example, I want to point out in the game number 3 in the quarterfinal, he was playing Olaf against Gragas, and he absolutely had zero clue what to do that game. To put it into perspective, so this is a winning jungle matchup. You can actually bully the Gragas early game. You have more jungle pace. You can either farm your camps faster and get lead that way around, or you can invade on the Gragas because you generally are just faster at clearing camps. And he did nothing of this. The clearest point was just that his mid had priority and had a huge wave stacking at 3 minutes into the tower. And at the same time, Amazing did 3 camps topside into base. So they didn't utilize the fact that Nukedog had priority and they could invade over the jungle side, where he knew, because they had vision, that all of Gragas' camps were still up and he could easily just walk in and contest. Instead, he decides to base, buy his Predator boots, and then walk out and then want to start pressure when the enemy mid starts building a wave. And then he starts invading when the enemy mid laner has a wave hitting your mid laner's tower, and then he's in the enemy jungle, and then he obviously has to run because else he will get collapsed on, and then he ends up going 1 level down in the Olaf versus Gragas matchup. And that's, for me, that's just like no understanding of what you're doing. I mean, I know that he has the experience, and he could probably afterwards watch the game and be like, yeah, I fucked up here. Like, I don't know what the fuck I'm doing. But in the game, it really matters that you know what you're doing and you're planning around your team, and you know who on your team has priority on certain waves, so you can plan invades to accelerate your champion the way you want to play your jungle matchup. And he showed very very little knowledge about how to do that in that specific game. So, and I think the only game he really had like decent performance was the last game on Jarvan, and that really showed his lack of his weak champion pool, that he had to pull out Jarvan in this kind of meta where I felt like he could have, if he was a good Olaf player, he could have just picked Olaf there and he could probably carry the game, but he was just not feeling confident on this champion. So he went back to an old pick of his, Jarvan. I played it myself a lot. I think it's decent, like it's average. You can probably have impact, but it's definitely not the best champion. So a lot of weaknesses from his side, at least in the quarterfinal. And if he goes into the semifinal with this kind of approach, then he will just get slaughtered, absolutely slaughtered. So yeah, I'm a bit worried for Schalke.
Okay, right, yeah, go on.
Just to reiterate the point, I felt like a lot of his ideas on how to jungle were a bit outdated. So like the whole concept of having Maokai and ganking top and getting the jungler ahead like doesn't necessarily work if you are in a situation where tempos are on bot side or something like this. So just like this kind of, there's CC in lane, I will gank that lane, seemed to be a lot of how he was thinking in this series, and it was just really weird in general. So but I do want to understate like what Caedrel said earlier, like sometimes bad direction is better than no direction, and I feel like that's kind of the story of the Schalke lineup this year. So
I also just want to point out to what you're saying about the development of jungle. I think it's very apparent that this is actually very true, because if you look at a team like Vitality, for example, the development they had the split, it's exactly the same. Like you look at a guy like Gilius and you look at a guy like Kikis, what is the difference? Like Kikis, the way he plays the jungle is just way more modern, and the way you should be approaching the jungle rather than the way Gilius was approaching, which is pretty similar, honestly, to the way Amazing approaches the jungle. So I think it's very clear that this is the way that you are most efficient playing the jungle role, and it really shows in some of the games in the qualifier how it backfires. Just lack of knowledge, in my opinion.
Okay. Right, what about this? We'll do the semi-finals, since obviously we can do the other match and lead into the other semi-finals. So now Schalke goes forwards and they play Vitality due to the reseeding. So, Kelsey, who's going to win this matchup?
Schalke versus Vitality. So a lot of this comes down to how I think they would go stylistically, and a lot of what Schalke has been getting, as I mentioned like earlier in the episode, is like enemy team drafts 3 tanks. You have a Kai'Sa on the enemy team, so you always have this option of going in and coming back throughout the series. I feel like Vitality is maybe the team in playoffs least likely to draft like a 3 tank lineup or something that has this sort of option. Also, we saw that Schalke was getting advantages, as Cole pointed out, through having their mid lane, side lane a lot on things like Ryze. That's something that Vitality has always sort of wanted to do. They haven't done it as much as regular season, but with Kikis in the lineup, they're way more rejuvenated in their early games. So they're playing like they're focusing more on their mid to late game setups. And I think that has helped them a lot. That said, I do think a lot of what Vitality does is they'll focus on a play that won't work if you're paying attention to what's going on in the game. And if that backfires, there's still an option for Schalke to play like extremely defensively and win teamfights. Still, I think that Vitality should be the favorites in this series.
Okay. Right. What's your thoughts, Caedrel? Who do you think's favored?
I mean, I'll be honest, I think Vitality's probably going to roll over Schalke because of the opposite playstyles. Like, when Vitality wins games, they win in the first 15 minutes like super hard, or 20 minutes, and that's mainly through Kikis and Jizuke, I think. Like Jizuke will push mid level 3 or 4 somehow and get prio with Kikis, and then he'll dive a side lane, and then once that side lane's dove, he'll just dive it again and again, and yeah, the game will just start crumbling from there onwards. I think Kikis will probably out jungle Amazing quite hard, and I think that Jizuke and him will work together to probably win all 3 games.
So Kold touched earlier on like the difference between Gilius and Kikis, and people have seen obviously the Vitality team seem to gain something extra, seem to be on an upswing since Kikis came in. What's your opinion on the jungle swap?
Yeah, I think Kold has hit the nail on the head. Kikis' way of jungling is way more modern. He plays the game really well. He plays the game really correct. He knows how to play around the side lanes and how to play with mid prio. And I guess Kilius' jungle style was just outdated compared to his. And once you put in Kikis, you could see the results were so much better with Kikis. And yeah, I think Vitality will definitely shine in playoffs. But I think Schalke can maybe win if the game gets stalled out, because they like playing the Kai'Sa and stuff. And if they do get those champs and the game goes later on, then they'll definitely have a chance. But I think Vitality's champ pools are just so big, and you never know what to expect. Upset could pick Kai'Sa, and then Minishupax will just bust out Heimerdinger and take his tower, or he'll pick Misfortune
Draven
again, or Draven. They have so many different AD picks, they have so many different mid picks. I think that the drafts can be pretty rough for Schalke as well.
Come on, Kold. Who's going to win this one?
I mean, there's, in my opinion, there's no doubt that Vitality is going to absolutely destroy Schalke. But I do want to touch on some of the points that maybe I hope I'm wrong, because then at least we will have some games to watch that are enjoyable. So I remember the first time Amazing played against Kikis, and he was like, I know how to tame this beast. I know how to. I worked with him before. I know how to. I know how to hold him down. He doesn't have a chance against me. So I believe in him, until I see otherwise. And I think that will be the core of the game, honestly, because if Amazing can somehow hold down Kikis in the early game, I also just want to stress out that as much as we praise Kikis for his early game aggression and that he's constantly invading, he also takes a lot of risks. It's not he doesn't just. There's a reason why we don't see it. The way he plays the game, it kind of reminds me of the start of Peanut when he joined the league. He constantly in the enemy phase, in the enemy jungle, he was the living ward. He was the guy that just plays aggressive whenever he can, and any small advantage he can get, he will try to get it. And the reason why we don't see this as much, I think, in Korea is because there is a lot of risk to it. One time you fail on this, you will fall behind for maybe the majority of the game, and you are in a position where maybe you lost the game for your team. So I think there's definitely some planning around the early game that Schalke needs to evaluate. How can we know Kikis will look for invade. We know he will look to punish me. We know he will walk in my face. It's going to be so crucial, rotations on from lanes towards the jungle, who can support it. It's early priority on lanes that can support whatever invade on either side is going to be crucial. But I just think Kikis has shown so much more potential of what he can do rather than Amazing that it's so Kikis' favorite. But I'm hoping that Amazing will show up in some fashion, the old TSM way. But even that is debatable. But to some extent, just show up and have a good game, and then I think it will be a good series. But in my mind, Vitality is going to absolutely destroy them.
Aside from Amazing, is there another player on Schalke that can have some game-changing performance? If there's a chance that the Schalke team wins, who would it need to be? This is for everyone.
I think Upset, obviously.
Yeah, I agree.
It has to be him. But the problem for Upset is that he will probably first be online in the game around 20 minutes, and maybe the game is already lost in 20. Maybe he will get to the point where he needs to play champs like Varus or something like this to have any kind of impact in the early stages of the game, because else they will just start losing. So it's the meta, I think, generally shifts more towards Schalke's kind of playstyle with more tanks in the top lane, slower game pace. So maybe the meta will make it so that they have a higher chance of winning. But I think Vitality is just on another level in terms of game understanding in the early game, and that will just show, I think.
To me, it has to be NukeDuck, actually, because the way that Schalke tend to draft, it's really easy for Kikis to kind of get the advantages he wants through invades, because they will draft defensive side lanes. And by that, I mean top and ADC support during laning phase. They play Braum, they play Poppy or whatever, and they just want to play champions that don't get dove, so they'll have priority in those sides. But they'll focus a lot on giving NukeDuck counterpick, which is why NukeDuck has this crazy stat of I don't know, 14 plus unique champions played. I'm not sure what the number is at this point.
I think it's 17 or something crazy.
There you go. Yeah, something insane. Because he'll play like a unique counter pick or something like this, and they'll play for mid priority really hard. So Nukeduck has to be the one who's backing up amazing. Nukeduck has to be the one who's punishing Kikis for taking like extra risks. And that's sort of how they ended up beating them in the one match in the regular season before tiebreakers, because they banned out Kikis's, like, Kikis had sort of an amazing Sejuani meme about him earlier on, except it was a Kikis Trundle, right? And so they banned out the Trundle, and they managed to shut down his invade attempts with like mid effectively. So I think that it has to be Nukeduck for me. If the series is going to win it, they have to be playing like really hard for Nukeduck. They have to be getting Nukeduck a good like laning counter pick and have Nukeduck be able to punish the jungler really, really well, because I don't necessarily think Amazing will do it on his own, and Amazing will in fact create a lot of opportunities for Kikis to invade if he's playing to the wrong side or something of that nature.
Okay. Right, let's talk about the other side of the bracket then. So we had G2 against Misfits, very highly anticipated matchup, I think, actually. Obviously, in the past, with different lineups, it has been an LCS final, but this is a different era of G2, different era of Misfits as well, but not quite as drastic. Now, coming in, on paper, G2 is supposed to be the favoured team, right? The Misfits team, I mean, there was this stat out there, which some people aren't going to like, but there was a stat that over the last 4 weeks, Misfits and H2K had the same records in terms of win-loss. So, on the, you know, I mean, take from that what you will. It's just a stat. I don't, you know, stats can't hurt. They're just facts.
It was almost 3-1, you know?
I mean, it should have been this H2K beating Misfits, but yeah.
Yeah, okay. It was just a Baron steal. We were like Caedrel was smashing through the early game. So
I thought we said earlier in this show that better jungler.
There you go.
Doesn't always win.
I mean, there was a 5k gold lead on my screen, but
I thought you were gonna go the other way and say that. I thought we said earlier in the show that almost doesn't count, but you went the other way with the better jungler doesn't always win. So it's rough.
I mean, he has to believe almost counts, doesn't it? It's like he's like, I almost got out of a group at Worlds once. You know, like that's how every story starts. And then the girl goes, "What's Worlds?" Anyway, so and then he goes back to talking to that guy on that table for 5 minutes. I remember every story is actually about yourself.
Video games. I can't believe it. And then, see ya.
And then they're like, "Oh, you're a pro player. Wow, I've heard a little bit about that actually. But isn't it esports or something?" So anyway, what's your alias? And he goes, "Shit, think of a new one. Kold. Yeah, bitch.
What you will learn with time. What you will learn with time is that you need to rephrase it. So what I personally have come to conclusion is that you approach them. I'm a professional athlete.
Okay.
And from there on, it's smooth sailing.
See, that doesn't work for me because I don't look like an athlete. So.
No, you could be like a pole vaulter or something, or maybe like a chess player, Caedrel. Don't downplay yourself, mate.
Does chess players count as athletes?
Listen, if we're going to make esports in the Olympics, I reckon chess is probably the greatest test of human physical endurance ever seen. So, no, here's the thing, Kold. I was with you right up until you made this last part, because I thought what you were going to say was, I agree, what you actually do is reframe it. So I did this years ago. What I used to do is, when they would say, like, you know, what do you do for a job? I'd say, I have quite a weird job, actually, because what I do is I fly around the world and I talk to, like, specialists who are the best in the world at a very, very niche ability. And then they go, what happens is, if they're not interested at all, they just, like, you know, they end the conversation. If they're interested, though, they start to just ask more, what do you mean specialists? Well, they're actually people, like, you know, they're like 1 out of 100,000 in terms of how good they are. And then what you do is you just draw them in. So eventually when they get all the information, they're already like invested at that point. Yeah, I thought you were going to go with that, but you just blatantly lie and say you're a professional athlete. So that is another approach to talking to women. You are right. Yes.
That's not true though, because when I played in NA in my American visa, it was actually saying that I was an athlete.
Yes.
So it's not wrong. It's not right, but it works.
True. Well, to be fair, my visa for America did say that I am someone who has extraordinary talent that the United States of America needs. That's all debatable, I think. It's fairly subjective on almost every word of that sentence, actually.
Yours is more of a lie than mine, though, but I mean...
I don't know. The problem is extraordinary doesn't have to mean good. It just means, like, really, really unusual. So actually, you know...
Americans believe that anyone with a British accent has extraordinary talent that America needs. It's like, you're talking about complete bullshit, but you have a British accent. So we'll listen to you. You must be sophisticated. You must be formal and intelligent. So Unlucky for you, Kold, I guess, but at least half of the people in the call can capitalize.
All I get told is that I have a potato in my mouth. Then that's it. Okay. Just nothing more, nothing less.
You should just try and spin that, because the way you could flip that is in battle rap, in the African American hip hop community, they often always go on and on about using a potato as a silencer. So you should just do some shit like that, like, you know, yeah, and when I flip the potato and hit you with the 4-4, you're going to be the one that's silent. Some shit like that. Like that's a fucking straight fireable right there. Record that, someone. Make that its own clip. That's pretty good.
Fucking
but anyway,
straight fire.
Let's go back over to the match we were setting up here. G2 against Misfits. So Kelsey, bit of a shocking result, right?
I didn't think it was that shocking, because let's be honest. Every time that Misfits has gone into playoffs before, they've kind of looked really questionable. Obviously, Kold will remember the famous Splyce Misfits series from last spring, and then you have the Misfits Unicorns of Love series from summer as well, where it felt like, okay, Misfits maybe could win, but it should be Splyce or it should be UOL favored. And this time around, it was kind of like, yeah, Misfits look like dog shit, but there's always the question of what are they working on for playoffs? Like, how much have they used this week? And it always feels like Misfits use the week between regular season and playoffs really well. Whether it's to target a weakness in the enemy team's champion pool, whether it's to do something else of that nature. That said, as we said on the show with Peter, both Misfits and G2 were kind of hurt more than other teams by the meta swinging back to longer games, the meta swinging back to all these things. And I think in G2's case, it was an all-inning on funnel and all-inning on Mage's bot that ended up hurting them a bit more than Misfits, like, just playing how they always would play. So that's what happened.
I don't know why people keep saying that Misfits G2 used so much time on spending on practicing funnel, because I remember actually having a discussion with some of the players from that team. I think it was Yamato saying it on broadcast as well, that the reason why they play bad now is because they spend too much time playing funnel. I think this is completely wrong, because from what I know, they actually didn't play that much funnel in Scrim, at least from what I've heard. So they were actually just playing normal. So I think it's like trying to find an excuse for a reason for why they're playing bad, when in reality I think they are not at the same level as some of the other teams in terms of like understanding of what they need to do in game to win the game. And I think that's really showed in the quarterfinal.
Well, I agree with you. I also think, like, for example, earlier on in the split, we saw Jankos play a much better jungling game, like versus Roccat, for example. Jankos looked much better on that, so I think people latch onto the funnel as, okay, he maybe didn't play as much like standard jungle games. He's spent more time practicing Braum, and he's just like trying to play a more defensive style now. I think in the series he had a decent adaptation in game 2 with his pathing and stuff like this, but in general, Jankos just hasn't been the Jankos that we've expected from earlier on in the season, and that's why people look at the funnel, because it's like, oh, okay, what has Jankos done differently this split than he's done previously? And it's like, okay, he spent way too much time playing shit like Braum and not necessarily jungling. So
if you would know the amount of games I played on shit like Rakan, Alistar, Braum in solo queue and in scrim, like, it was actually, I played this way too much for just playing. I think I played one funnel game in competitive. Maybe I played like 50 games of these champions in total, scrim and solo queue, just to get on a high level. So I don't think this is any excuse. Like then he just didn't have the knowledge in the first place about like jungle rotations, this kind of stuff. So I'm not buying into that at all.
Okay.
Yeah, go on.
I do think I agree with you that maybe he doesn't have the knowledge, but I do think, like I said, in it was game 2 where he ends up actually like doing really, really well early on against Maxlor. Maxlor, I think, made a mistake going to top side, and then Jankos ends up like being able to contest him on both bot and top scuttle. He gets like good wards down, so he does still have like a pretty strong jungle knowledge. I think you can see certain glimmers of it here or there. So it just feels really weird that there's so many games where he just does the wrong thing or he's performing poorly overall.
It's just not consistent at all. Like when I watched the first game where he does full clear on Gragas, get boots with Predator, and then run straight to top lane in a GP versus Cho'Gath matchup to force Cho'Gath flash instead of like trying to swing either mid matchup or bot matchup, which are actually the matchup you should try to swing in order for you to win the game. I think that's where I question like his decision making, because I think that's just lack of knowledge how to actually win the game. And in a quarterfinal, these decisions are just not acceptable in my opinion.
Sure.
Right. Caedrel, most people have a very high opinion of Perkz. Like I think some people would say, even on when his team isn't doing that well, some people think he's the MVP of the league, he's the best player in the league, he's the best mid laner. Do you think he's the best EU mid laner?
I think him and Caps are the two best, but I think they play really different. I think Caps is just like that carry that you can leave there and he's always going to have a lead, and then Perkz is the kind of player who can match up the Caps and can lead the team into like the team more of a team game rather than just carrying alone and just solo killing the whole world.
So in a world in which Misfits won 3-0, but everyone was still flaming Senkox, what is the flaw in G2 that they can have a player as good as Perkz? I mean, people often highly praise Wander as well. What do you think the central flaws are in this G2 core that stop them being a championship squad?
I mean, I think in the quarterfinal playoffs specifically, I think the Misfits just came in way more prepared. Like you saw in game one, they pulled out like 3 completely unheard of champs, which like no one's played. Like they played Skarner, TF, Kalista, which like has not been played throughout the entire split. So I think that caught like G2 off guard a bit. And then they were just trying to just play through meta, which they weren't good at in the first place. And then like game two, they pulled out the Draven again. And like game 2, they pulled out another pick, which was like really weird. I can't remember what it was. But they were just putting out picks which made them look like they were so prepared. And I mean, Alphari was playing really well in top lane. Max was playing really well. I just think Misfits was just playing really well overall. And G2 couldn't really match up to it.
Kold, how is it possible that Misfits swept the series, but everyone was flaming Senkox? I mean, I will admit, when I watched these games, I was getting kind of flashbacks of when Samsung Galaxy used to just tell Crown, like, just play Malzahar, mate. Like, that's your job.
That's what
Try
he
not to die, just play Malzahar. That's what it reminded me of. So come on, he's obviously your old teammate. What do you think his problems have been here that people are flaming him even when he wins?
So first of all, I want to say though, like, I think from G2's point of view, Wanda had a weak series, and usually he needs to have a strong series if they want to beat some of the top teams. I think so. My conclusion on the series was that because I feel like Wanda had a mental block when Senkox locked in the Malzahar, because he just knows that when back in the day, when we locked in the Malzahar, it was just such a free win. So I think that has something to do with it. Other than that, I mean, for me, Senkox is like, he's like this solid player that can play any style, but doesn't necessarily excel at either of them. If that makes any sense, I don't know if that makes sense. But so basically, from what I saw in the series, usually there's one guy on the team that needs to take the D, and he was the guy, and he knew that his team was just better overall on other players, and then he played towards this. And I think
wait a minute, what does that mean? What is that terminology, take the D? What does that mean?
I mean, what does that mean? I think
you just mean the one who just gets wrecked, right? He just has to say, I'll take one for the team, yeah?
In better League of Legends terms, or do you want to go even deeper than this?
It just means you're the one who takes the sacrifice for the team, right?
Exactly. I mean, usually in drafts, I don't think it's always the mid. Usually it's actually never the mid laner that does this. It's usually like either it's top lane or it's bot lane, because in most professional games you will have a strong side and you will have a weak side, and the weak side often is the side that will take the D in. Sure. Maybe it's not the phrase for this kind of show, but that's the way I phrase it. Maybe I'll have to.
It's not the phrase for the Riot analyst desk, but
no. Here's the thing,
we'll accept it on this show.
I understand now, but I actually legitimately thought for a second you were referring to like something you'd shortened like a different word, and that it was actually a real term that people use. I'm fully aware now what it means. So,
okay.
So we styled it out. Don't worry. It all seems fine to the viewers. They don't mind. So, so yes. Anyway, Sencux clearly took the D in a lot of these games. So, what were you saying?
I mean, the series was just so one-sided because like Alphari was his outclassing wonder. Bot lane was both Mickey X and Hans Sama was just playing better than the opposing bot lane. They were snowballing over that. I think, if anything, Misfits showed a very, very slow and weak mid game, that they didn't actually push their lead well enough. I think that's something they could learn. But other than that, it was just so Misfits favored. And honestly, Sencux didn't have to do much. I will agree, though, he got heavily carried by his teammates. But I mean, that's just sometimes League of Legends, you know? Not everyone can be the star player. That's just the game. Sure. There's not much to say. I think Misfits showed most of their cards, and that will probably hurt them going into the semifinal, because they're very predictable in the way they want to approach the game. But outside of this, I expected a series that would be way closer, but the G2 that showed up just had no fucking clue what they're doing, in my opinion. So I don't know. Not much to say about that series.
I would say if you take these two rosters, if you take like peak Misfits and peak G2, stylistically, Misfits should do well against G2. Because the way that Misfits look worse is when they're forced into a situation where they have to counterpick top. You've counterpicked the support in the bot lane, and they have to play the top side. That's when they've looked their worst, because they will lose 2v2 tops when it's favored for them, just because of the way that like they will approach the top side ganks. They look much better when they play the bot. They look much better when they're doing that, and Alphari is just absorbing pressure. If you're G2 and you get most of your advantages by sending jungle around topside, getting deep vision around topside, having this be your success point, like Alphari is just insanely good at absorbing pressure. And in this game, this series, it went one step further, and Alphari was like full on destroying people, just like by himself. So I think that this was a really bad series for a bad opponent when they're firing on all cylinders for G2 to take on, because they like to have their bot play safe. They like to have their bot kind of show up maybe mid to late with some engage, with some CC, and that was just not going to happen for them versus a team that likes to pick things like Draven and steamroll through bot side.
I will say, though, like I understand your point that stylistically this matchup in the current state of the League of Legends meta is heavily favored for Misfits, but stylistically you could say the same if it's like Ash Varus meta bot lane with a Tam Kench and Braum and nothing happens bot lane for the first, like it's just a farm fest, and then there's actually carries in the top lane, then I would have this matchup favored towards G2. So I think the way the meta shifted, the way the game changed to heavy tanks top lane, heavy tanks jungle, very much focus on ADC and mid lane to be the guys carrying. I think this was what hurt Misfits the most, not necessarily that stylistically these teams just don't mesh up. Like, because I mean, then G2 is just a bad team, you know. Like if stylistically they go into Misfits, then this matchup just doesn't work for them. Like, I think the meta was more of a problem than the stylistic point of view from the two teams, but. We see what happens when it's like, I think this is like the regular meta in a way, where there's ADCs on both sides that are the true carries, and that is probably the League of Legends I like to watch the most. So I think in this meta, it just doesn't work well.
Yeah, I think if Heimerdinger and Fiddlesticks were still like really good meta, then G2 would have a chance. But
yeah, for example,
I think I agree with you to an extent, but it is a lot harder in general. Like even when Misfits, it is like topside focused meta, it's and things like this, or even when it's not topside focused meta, Misfits just struggle way more when they have to trade to top. So
I mean, we saw that. That's why they struggled so much in the second half of the split, because they tried to change their style, and it just didn't work. Like they couldn't play this way.
Yeah, I agree. So I think that focuses a lot. But even when it's not topside focused meta, let's say that they're playing so much to bot, or even when, okay, let's put it this way. When it is topside focused meta and you still have the option of playing to bot, I think that you're still in a position where bot side trades tend to give more for your team in general. So like Misfits can still sometimes make it work. It's just that one thing that happens is that their top plays like super defensively.
Yeah,
and
I see what you mean. I see what you mean. Like in an equal world where both sides have equal power in terms of like you can play to bot, you can play to top. I think I agree with you. Bot has a higher chance of snowballing there, and that's where probably it's slightly Misfits favored. Yeah, I agree with you. I see.
Right, so for the semi-final, we have the matchup that basically is what a lot of people thought the final might actually be if you'd have asked earlier in the split. It's Misfits versus Fnatic. Right, Caedrel, can Misfits actually win this game and go to the final?
I don't know. I think they have a chance for sure because I think their strengths are in bot lane, and I think that the last week they probably come up with some more like creative picks, like they did the Malzahar, TF, Skarner, Kalista. They probably have something else planned. But I think Fnatic is just such a good team on paper in every role, and I mean, I guess Misfits do have a chance through if Alphari performs that well and the bot lane performs that well, then there's definitely a chance for them to win. But I would definitely favor Fnatic.
What do you think, Kold?
What do I think? So, if you put in, let me put it this way: if you put in the Fnatic team from the Spring Split final and you plug them in, and they play against the Misfits that is right here in front of you, then I would say Fnatic is going to win that series every time, because the meta is just pretty much the same as it was in the Spring Split finals, and we just saw what Fnatic can do in that kind of meta where it just becomes a Reckless show and he can really pop off. What I want to say though is that we haven't seen much of Reckless like the last couple of weeks, and Fnatic's style of play has changed a lot since then. We played them in the last week of LCS, and they played their Pyke style where he's constantly roaming mid, and they're playing Ezreal bot lane. And we had a plan against this that worked out pretty well with playing a better scaling ADC and actually just ending up team fighting against this kind of style. And they didn't, and then they obviously lost. So I think we will see a different Fnatic than we have seen in the later stages of the split, and that will probably give it slightly in favor of Fnatic. But there's a lot of question marks, like how is Reckless going to play? We haven't seen him play much else than Ezreal, and in my opinion, Ezreal is probably not the best champ right now. It's okay, it works, but it seems like champs like Kai'Sa can do more in the team fights. But stylistically, very similar teams, unless they start bringing in Bwipo. We don't know. That's what I mean. Like there's so many question marks. Like who's playing top lane? Is it Bwipo? Is it Soaz? I assume it's gonna be Soaz because of the meta changes into tanks. So yeah, slightly Fnatic favorite, but a lot of question marks around Reckless and his performance. And that's probably gonna be the deciding factor. Reckless against Hansama.
By the way, how does it actually work in LCS? Like if you play a series, you can still sub the players between the games, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So in theory, you could still see all these players.
I think the way it works is like right after the game ends, you need to, if you want to do a change, you need to make it so that the enemy knows, obviously, and then they instantly know as well, and then they can prepare what's coming for them.
Okay.
Yeah, so this is why I said earlier that if they can make the post Reckless rotation work, it'll be better during playoffs than it was in regular season.
Okay.
But I'm not sure how exactly that will work out, because I think that there are still teams playing mage bot, and there are still options to play that in certain scenarios, but I think that you have an even better idea of what they're going to play if they play mage bot now, like probably something, they'll go for a Swain or something like this, than you did before. So it'll be really interesting to see if they can make that rotation work.
I mean, obviously the godlike move would be they play Bwipo and Reckless, so everyone's like, all right, Bwipo, and then they just pick Kennen for Reckless and he plays top lane. And then
you're wrong. You're wrong. He will lock in the Vayne like Uzi did, and he will go top lane, and he will just play the top lane Vayne, and he will just pop off, and that will be the strategy.
Don't know about popping off. I remember one time, this is about 4 years ago now, where Reckless played Vayne and he got like a 6 stat line. He was like 7-0-1. Fnatic lost the game, of course. He never went in at any point in time. He just right-clicked champions who were dying, basically. So maybe modern Reckless will. It's true. Sometimes that guy does come out.
To clean up
Worlds. Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's not Worlds, so we might see him.
Misfits are red side, like blinding Cho'Gath and banning 2 tops, you know? Go for it. Get the Vayne game in. There
Kelsey,
you go.
who's going to win this matchup?
I think that because of what we said before, what Kold said earlier with, like, we don't know how Reckless will play, and in a lot of situations where there is a lot of enemy jungle pressure bot, like we have seen Fnatic struggle a lot more. So if you're having like a Draven setup, all the sorts of things, then that can be a real issue for them. But I think that Fnatic's, like, one thing we didn't really touch on much when we talked about the Misfits G2 series was how the game sort of swung in mid to late game. And I think Fnatic is a team where we won't see a lot of confusion around mid to late game setups, because I would say that G2, for example, had games where they were pushing mid and they were pushing bot, and then they used that kind of priority in mid game to move their AD carry and support into like top river and just kind of like walk towards top side, which didn't have pressure when they should have just been getting a vision around Baron. And then they just lost control of the entire map off of moves like this. So I expect Fnatic to do that sort of thing a little bit less. And for even if Misfits to get super far ahead, we see Misfits struggle around Baron. We see Misfits like pushing far past like second tier turrets in almost some situations. So I still think that even if Misfits can get super far ahead in the bot, this will still be Fnatic favored because they'll have a better approach to that stage of the game.
Right, we're back for the second half of the show. The first half we did the EU playoffs. Because this time we're actually going to attempt to cover both leagues, not just like take 3 weeks apart and then go, right, all the whole playoffs. Let's summarize those. So we've got the NA people here now, although they're all actually like secretly people who used to watch the EU LCS who just now make money. That's how bad the franchising got. They even just brain drained all the people who actually used to watch EU LCS now. Now no one watches it except Kelsey because she has to, and even then she covers her eyes for some of it. Right, so our guests for this segment are in the bottom
H2K games.
Exactly. In the bottom right-hand corner is Empyre, who, I mean, I've referenced this many times before. Used to be, he's made the gradual step up. He went from Twitter analyst to like involved in the EU LCS to now he's in the NA LCS, but with the caveat it's for Clutch Gaming, who A, hired everyone, and B, you know, you can hire everyone, but you still got to hire the right people. That's all I'm going to say, you know. So again, no one knows how that goes. Again, just like the last episode, obviously all the people on this show are not in the playoffs, otherwise they'd be in the playoffs right now. We're talking to people who can tell us about the league, and I'll make the same joke I did on the past one. I hope that the fact that they didn't make the playoffs makes them sort of secretly embittered towards the teams in the playoffs, and therefore they give us that real straight fire analysis and the real deficiency these teams. Okay, so Empyre, just give us a little thought on the whole Clutch scenario. What's gone on from your perspective? Like, what do you think of this split and the contrast to the last split?
So I think our team has always had like a lackluster early game, but in spring we'd be able to get away with it versus most teams because we'd go for like skilling 5v5 comps that once we hit those 3-4 items, we'd start winning team fights and win the game. And we always had like good defensive vision that helped us stall for that game. On top of the fact that most teams in NA are really bad at snowballing, except for like a couple of teams like Team Liquid or Echo Fox. And so that really, the combination of all that worked to our advantage. But then summer hit and several teams improved with roster changes or benefited from the meta shifting to a lot more early game focused. And because we weren't an early game focused team, we got hit hard by that. And we also weren't proficient on Mage's Bot or Funnel, and we just adapted really poorly on and versus those alternative strategies. We tried all split to improve our early game, but there were a lot of conflicting play styles between the players, and the players, the staff, and the org weren't able to resolve that. So I think in that aspect, we failed as an org and as a staff.
See, that was good because you actually did give legit analysis, but you also sort of hit every talking point in exactly the way like a media training person would want you to. Like you were like, the players, the staff, and the fans of the organization didn't get the results we expected, and anticipate for the future of Clutch Gaming, which I expect to be bright and a family-based show. You know, like, here's the thing. I've got one question for you though, Empyre. Right? Yeah. Since you used to be a Twitter analyst, right? Just this is for this moment. This is going to be like a confessional moment, okay? Did you ever in the past talk like mad shit to me on Twitter or something, like something I might not have seen at the time because I might not have known who you were. Did you ever say any mad shit to me on Twitter?
I think I criticized you once for calling wild turtle that word.
Yes. Yeah.
I think that was the only time. I don't remember anything else.
Funnily enough, that particular word is one that I always describe to people to show like what a gamble social media is. Because right now, I mean, I've had people on shows say this like in the last few weeks. People use that term all the time. You get away with it 99% of the time on that particular word. It's a word that begins with R that means like mentally slow. I think people could probably guess. In fact, it is the French word for slow. So people might know this word, right? Well, what's funny is 99% of the time, you can say it right now. You could even say it by accident or Riot broadcast, probably at the end of the world. But the one time people decide to wreck you, they will just act as though you've like said some full-on slur or something. So that's one of the ones I'll stand by. Not a fan of his, but whatever. And not even that I don't like him as a person, just think he is not that smart as an intelligent individual in the game. Also, was also a straight fire comment about Lucian, which is still a piece of crap champion, right? So, Zaboutine.
Yeah. Hi.
Coach of OpTic Gaming. That was actually somewhat of an elaborate setup, because here's the thing, Zaboutine. I thought to myself, wait a minute. I don't really fully remember that, because obviously you were a caster for this French stream, right? And obviously, so people in the English-speaking world, we don't watch the French stream, we don't know that well, but it's its own world. People are watching. I know from like CS, for example, people who are Russian. The Russian casters are super famous because obviously everyone just watches the Russian stream. So France has its own scene in that sense, you know, famously don't like to speak English as much. But I did have, like, my spider senses started tingling when I remembered you were coming on the show, because here's the thing. There is like an unwritten rule that everyone French in esports must take a shot at me at some point in time on Twitter. So I had a look up. It turns out my spider senses were right, actually. I've got the tweet here, and by the power of technology, unlike all my past shows, I've got the technology to do this now. I'm going to bring this up on my screen, actually, so people are going to be able to see the tweet. So I'll tell you what it was, right? It seems fairly harmless. What happened was, in 2015, when Fnatic, the really amazing Fnatic, the 18-0 Fnatic, went to Worlds, they made that excuse after they lost. Daylor said, like, you know, all the players were like too burned out or too tired or whatever. And I made a tweet where I basically said, take the same excuses Daylor made and assign them to Aaron from EDG, because obviously EDG went out 0-3 in the quarterfinals. Everyone was wrecking the Chinese teams that year. Obviously, it was 2015. Kelsey knows all about that. She's blotted that one out. That's like a bad bender that we don't talk about that one. So the rest of the tweet said, assign them to Aaron from EDG, and Fnatic fans would have roasted him alive. Now, that's not even a very incendiary tweet for me.
I'm in an interview right now.
Sorry. Talking to me there. All right. That's not even a very...
No.
That's not even a very incendiary tweet. It's not even one of the most... I mean, it's not even as bad as what Empyre just referenced there. I said it's nothing even really that bad, but Zaboutine jumped right in with both feet. He goes, I'm a Fnatic fan. So immediately he started off on a bad foot right there. He's a Fnatic fan. We're okay. We forgive that. He said, I'm a Fnatic fan. Daylor made extremely poor decisions. So he's actually agreeing with me so far, bizarrely. But then this is what he says, okay? He said, is it a hobby to talk shit all the time? At your level, it's maybe even a sport. Now here's, by the power of magic, technology, and careers advancing, Zaboutine, I can actually answer that question for you. It is not, in fact, a hobby or a sport. It is a lifetime preoccupation / career move. So there we go. 3 years later, but you get the answer in the end.
Yeah, thank you for the answer. I truly appreciate it. Like, it's funny. It's funny, you know, because I've been, like, in France, I've been compared to you because I always try to, you know, like to, yeah, I can shit talk sometimes on social media, or especially in stream when the caster, and yeah, like I would never, like, at this point as a coach, I would never say like another coach would make like shitty, like horrible decision or thing like that, right? Even though I think the draft is dog shit or something like that, I would never say it like publicly. No. So you had to dig pretty deep to actually find this, right?
Sure, yeah.
That's actually congratulations on finding this one.
Right. No, we understand. You've been through the Empyre School of Media Training. You know, now you would just say, well, some regrettable decisions
No. That's not this. That's not media training. I always speak my mind. Therefore, my approach of the whole business has changed. Going into the team atmosphere, like being someone working with the players on a daily basis, understanding like the constraint they have on a daily basis, made me understand much more and be much more not compliant, but understanding like what can happen on stage. Right? It's much more complex than just a caster saying, why do they pick this fucking Kassadin with no wave clear, right? This doesn't exist anymore.
For you, yes.
For me, yeah. It does exist, right? People still make the poor decisions.
It's interesting because this is a show where we have 3 people who have gone from being content creators or casters or whatever to team atmosphere, right? At least in some regards. So I think that's an interesting question because I try because I continue to do both, right, to not limit my criticisms of other teams or things like this when I'm on a show like Narrative Wake or whatever. But at the same time, you think in your head, like, okay, I understand how difficult this is, or I understand a comment I make could really hurt like a player's career or something like this. But it's an interesting balance because I still think like there's a lot of room for super harsh criticism in media. And I think that should still be played through. And
as long as it's legitimate, I think it's completely right. But there is the big difference between like saying like the coach is an idiot because he picked that, right? Even though the strategy is wrong and the draft is wrong, and saying, oh, the team is wrong, right? Because the coach is not like holding this team in the hostage and saying, yeah, we are going to pick that, fuck off. You know, it's just much more like understanding what's going on and trying to make the appropriate criticism instead of saying, yeah, this guy is like our world or something like that. I try not to use European English, and you know, for my fellow Americans who are watching, there are some words that EU guys use that we shouldn't use in NA.
Yes. And here's the thing as well, you are absolutely right, Kelsey. Like, obviously 3 people on this show could have been on the show as Twitter analysts, as experts, you know, now on the show as members of teams. I, of course, could have been the coach of Fnatic, but quite frankly, looking at you 3, I think they're but for the grace of God go I. So I just I stayed in my lane. I stayed at what I'm good at. And also, to be fair, the one thing I do regret about that move, because I don't, like, here's the thing, the reason why I made that video about that is because it is just like a pure fantasy thing. I never really was going to do it, you know, like I could just tell it wasn't the right move. But the one thing I do regret looking back is that just as when Monty was the coach of CLG and he still did Summon and Insight, I never actually thought about that, but I would have kept doing Summon and Insight even if I'd been the coach. So all I can tell you is this, that would have been, forget, like, it was already a pretty highly viewed show. That would have broken fucking numbers. I would have just absolutely, like, if you think I would have done that thing of like, I can't talk about them because we're playing them this week. No, I'd have been talking mad shit. I'd have been going straight in on them. Now, to be fair,
and you'd have the legion of Fnatic fans behind you.
And I'd be starting a civil war, mate. It'd be brilliant, yeah. Now, obviously, unfortunately, if you look at the players I would have had, probably would have had who would all break down under the pressure of, oh, the coach is putting too much pressure on me or whatever. Like, so maybe it's for the best that it didn't work out for everyone. Right, so I want to ask you a question, actually, Zaboutine. So I did an interview with Romain, the guy from, I mean, he's higher up than you in technically like Infinite Holdings or whatever the fuck it's called, but OpTic Gaming as we're thinking of them in the LCS context. And he was telling me in this interview, in fact, he was almost bragging about it, about like this system that you've now got in the team of like doing a lot of theory work and like really walking the players through what they're doing and having all these subs and stuff. And like, I think it was like, wasn't it even something like you like inter-scrim between the players or something like that? Was it something along these lines, Zaboutine? Like the approach you were taking was like different this split, right?
Yeah, we changed a lot. I think, Romain, you know, sometimes he over exaggerates things.
Has been known to do that, yeah.
So we went full ham on the 10-man roster thing, right? We just included the academy in the same, like literally the same space as the LCS. I know some teams do, some teams don't, but there is no separation between the academy and the LCS. And we try to like pull the maximum, doing mostly one-on-ones for matchups, doing in-house scrims whenever we need to try some things. It's much more the StarCraft approach. I know, you know, esports for a long time. So the Korean StarCraft approach where you can always have your partner, you know, ready to go to try any kind of strategy or something like that.
And try something specific, right? Where you
exactly.
tell them, do like, this exactly, please. Yeah.
I want to try Caitlyn mid lane with like, I don't know, Hell of Blade. And then immediately you pull your partner, you know, quit your solo queue and just come with me and going to play like 20 one-on-ones. And it has been working pretty well. I feel like there was the improvement, but I think as well, like the changes we went through during the off season helped a lot. We had just overall better laners and I think it's much more like a sum of like good decisions that made OpTic improve as an org, because we improve on pretty much everything. And me getting more experience as well, because being a head coach and being new and coming from caster for franchise LCS was really hard in Spring Split. than just like a system, right? It's just not a choice of a system. It's improving and everything we failed on in Spring Split that just made us like look better in Summer Split, but still we didn't make it to playoff and we're not in the gauntlet. So
you were close though. I mean,
yes,
you had to pick. Last few weeks were pretty good. You were 1 game away.
First team in history to actually not even reach a tiebreak with 9 victory record. But you know, that's what 2018 looked like in NA. Everybody's trash, right? Yeah. That's what it looks. But
just blame all those teams for losing to FlyQuest inexplicably for the last like 6 weeks.
Oh man, I still feel bad about this one. We gave it to them. Like I asked my player what the fuck happened, and they were like, I don't know. We were afraid of losing, so we lost. That's hard.
Well, there's a lesson in there.
So you won your last game against 100 Thieves, and then I think it was like TL had to win versus TSM or something.
Clutch
and there were like 2 games that had Clutch had.
We were in. If Clutch won, thank you, Clutch. Thank you.
Yeah, it's always that fucking Clutch game and ruining it for everyone, isn't it?
Just
can't believe that.
He's in the call. There you go.
It is public knowledge that Damonte only plays Syndra.
They don't have enough analysts on that team. What do you expect them to do?
I don't know. Like Huni and GP, Damonte and Syndra, we watched the draft. We're like, okay, you know, at this point, it could be a win trade. It would be the same, you know.
On that game, we didn't. I actually was thinking about banning both GP and Rumble, but we took the chance because we thought maybe they wouldn't early pick GP on the 1-2-3, but then they did, and then we're like, oh shit.
Yeah,
and then we give them Syndra for some reason. I don't know why that happened.
That was really good. Thank you, guys. I'll send you some podcasts from my notes. You know?
I mean, hey, in the end, it's like it's always in the team's hands if they make it to playoffs or not.
Oh, I know.
How I think.
Man, I'm making a banter. Okay, it's
yeah, exactly. You know, don't take it so
what's done is done.
Yeah, you're not Zaboutine 3 years ago on Twitter. Right? Okay, so let's get into the playoffs. So the first matchup was a fucking hype matchup. It was the Echo Fox versus TSM. And as usual, like I've learned this from even when TSM was good, like I actually have like no safety about knowing that like TSM will lose the series. That's why it's actually so ridiculous that they lost that Wonder Clutch game and then the last Spring Split where, you know, everyone thought they were going to win it, because I've learned since long ago, it doesn't matter how good a team's matchup looks against TSM, how good, somehow they fucking always pull it out in the most bullshit fashion. So coming in, if everyone remembers, Echo Fox literally just played them in that tiebreaker, beat them in the tiebreaker. Then they come into the matchup, you know, all split long. Sure, Echo Fox had problems around Rift Rivals, but generally, you know, they've had plenty of good games. They've had times where some people, I think it was maybe even like Doublelift or something, was implying that they were like one of the best teams in the LCS. So everyone's coming in thinking, right, this is finally Echo Fox's chance to win. TSM will get eliminated again. We can get rid of that whole storyline that, like, you know, they're going to turn it around, etc. Empyre, what happened here? How the fuck did TSM win this series?
So, I guess...
Like, were you feeling similar? Were you thinking Echo Fox was going to be the favourite team?
I thought Echo Fox matched really well versus TSM, but before like I get into like the analysis, it has to be stated that Huni... what I heard is that they didn't scrim the whole week because Huni he says he had food poisoning, so they didn't scrim the whole week, and then on the day he was still kind of sick still, and I think that like affected them somewhat. But even then, I think Echo Fox between spring and summer, I think in summer they're like evidently playing a lot worse than they did in spring. I think the difference is how they play with the lead. Right now, it's just a lot more messier about which fights they take, and the teams, whenever they overstep, they get punished. So, for example, Huni dies in a side lane, but Echo Fox will still look for a 4v4 team fight in the enemy jungle when the enemy top laner still has TP. And I don't know, I think they did this in spring, but I felt like it was a lot more prominent this summer. And the only 2 reasons that stand out to me are because the team overall is less experienced now with 2 rookies, Damonte and Lost. I think Lost has only played in LCS for like a month now. And then the obviously big factor is when you think of Echo Fox, you think of Huni. And when Echo Fox were at their peak, Huni was like MVP. Everyone was saying this guy is the best player in the LCS, maybe the best player in the West. But this split, he has just been honestly piss poor. Like there's no other way to frame it. Like this guy, I feel like he cannot play or like physically function without his jungler being topside for 90% of the game. And I don't have like the stats to back this up, but from the eye test, it does seem that this split, Dardoch evened out his map presence a lot more. Whereas last split, I felt like Dardoch was sitting top lane for most of the game. And then it's not to mention that also Huni is getting caught a lot more in side lane. He's getting 1v1 killed in lane, you know, even by Hanser. I remember like Kelsey last year complaining why do top laners int to Hanser so much, and that happened yesterday or 2 days ago. And then finally, I think like they're playing a lot more recklessly because Huni's playing worse. And I feel like he is responsible for Fox's over-aggression, along with Dardoch. But that, like, basically the way Huni plays and the way Huni's commanding the team, I feel like results in a lot of throws. And I think in that series versus TSM, just allowed TSM to get back into the game with the way they are a lot more messy with their early game leads.
Huni actually died 20 times in this series, apparently, which is
it's
pretty wild. Like
he had the most deaths by top laner this split, and like third overall behind Dardoch. So those
funny
two
thing
are.
Is, he really does remind me of that like fucking meme of like the solo queue top laner in like, you know, low plat, where it's like because they think they're like the god and they're gonna smash the lane every time. It's like if they die the first time, you're like, right, we better fucking get a jungler up there because he's just going to go again, isn't he? And you know, they do that like gambler's fallacy of like, I'll get it back. It's like, that doesn't work. Like, you're actually now behind when you do it. Like, he does fucking int in some of these games.
Yeah.
He's got the excuse this time, though. Oh, I was food poisoned. Did that retroactively affect you in the last fucking LCS playoffs?
Yeah, like it was the whole split. It was the whole split. He played like that. And I do think a big part of it is, maybe a part of it is like his mentality, but I also think, because he really needs his jungler to be topside, and that's why he was so successful with Reignover most of the time. But when the meta is a bit like not super carry focused, like we saw some carries, but it's still tank dominant in most matchups. When the meta isn't super carry focused and the jungler doesn't play around him, like you're playing a tank, you can't expect your top laner to be like around you all the time, and you need to learn to play without. When your jungler is on the bottom side of the map. Okay.
Zaboutine, come on. What do you think of this Huni in this series?
I truly think that I completely agree. I think we play them quite a lot because I know EcoFox has a bad reputation in scrims, so no one wants to scrim them. So we scrim them a lot. You know, we have the leftovers. OpTic has the leftovers in Union scrims, so we scrim them a lot. And this is always the thing is, whenever you're ahead or behind against EcoFox, you know, like if you're ahead, it's pretty comfortable because they run it down, because emotionally they have a hard time gathering themselves and just playing slow and trying to defend and wait for you to make a mistake, like Clutch would do, for instance, or like FlyQuest did a lot in this split. Whereas EcoFox would run it down, and when they're ahead, you always have this hope that they're going for this random mass play that doesn't make sense, where Huni dies and the team just engage 4v5 and you just win the fight. Like last game we played against them was literally that. So I think TSM is very two-dimensional team. They have weak laning, strong mid lane. I think overall the laning phase of TSM is really, really poor. That's why if they go to Worlds, they will have a very hard time, especially because I feel the global meta of League of Legends, like worldwide meta, is much more lane driven, especially with the rise of China, where you really need to pressure and contest every CS in the lane. So I think they're very two-dimensional. Then they make a tempo play somehow, a TP play, or a roam for Mithi, something like a swap to actually enable, like open the map. And then they play really well, like a very classic macro style with pushing mid and trying to get objectives. But the thing is, they have a clear weakness, right? If you pressure them in the early game, but in this specific BO, like the specific series, I felt like EcoFox was unable to get this lead and hold the lead, right? They should get the lead. They have better laner, better pressure. They have the oppressive jungler. Grigny should not be able to defend against Dardoch like in the early game. His experience should like help the team getting this lead, but EcoFox doesn't understand how to use the lead to actually get objective and the game to close out the game. They just use the objective to fight, and there is always a chance to catch up when it's about fighting. And I think in the last 3 weeks, Bjergsen played above his average of the year. I would say way above his average of the year, and help TSM close out, because I don't think that TSM was the stack of talent we talked about at the beginning of the season, but Bjergsen stand out during this series in the last, I would say, 3 weeks of TSM regular season.
Yeah, I would say TSM is a lot similar to my team Clutch, where they are kind of really mediocre, like lackluster in the early game, and they just want to wait until the mid-late game and get a 5v5 team fight. And that's kind of what happened in the series, where EchoFox, basically TSM found ways to kind of delay EchoFox's snowball and EchoFox closing, because EchoFox kept putting themselves in bad situations, like Huni getting picked off, or Lost getting caught in mid lane as Draven. And then when you do that, you look at TSM's comp, they're just waiting to get to 3-4 items, and then once they get into that position, because you keep getting caught or making a mistake, they get to that position, and then they 5v5, and TSM has the better 5v5 team fighting, and then they just win. And I think if this was EchoFox Spring, they would have been able to close out this series, because they were in position to win almost every game in that series, but they just kept making dumb, like boneheaded mistakes throughout, and it kept bringing TSM back into this series.
I think TSM matched up really well against EchoFox stylistically this game because they did their research, or the series because they did their research. And by that, I mean you had times where, okay, we know Huni is going to push up, so if we do get bot prio, which isn't necessarily going to be super common, instead of using that to have support roam mid, we'll have like our lane reset, and we'll have Mithy go top, and we'll catch out the enemy jungler. We'll have on mid prio, or the enemy top laner, excuse me. On mid prio, we'll have Bjergsen go top, which I felt like he was doing pretty well. He wasn't necessarily working insanely well with his jungler, but you had either support, jungle, or mid going to the top side at some point to capitalize on these opportunities. Almost every single game of the series, when the lanes swapped and you had the 1v1 bot side with Huni versus Hanser, there were opportunities for the junglers and for Hanser to get a kill at that time of the game. So they used that really well to keep themselves in the game, even when EchoFox had a huge lead. And then EchoFox's vision setups and knowing when to reset in mid to late game, like they will often say, okay, we get a tower, we're going to keep playing here, we're going to keep playing here, and then they just won't reset with their advantage and get good vision. They almost don't think about having vision around Baron. They just kind of bait Baron and hope for the best almost in some certain situations. So I think that's where they lose a lot of their leads. And TSM seemed to be very cognizant of almost all of these factors and use them very well to just like play out the game in a patient way and take the series eventually. So
yeah, I will credit TSM. I think recently they've been doing a much better job trying to find counterplays in the early game, or punishing teams from overstepping. You see a lot of like Sven as Kai'Sa hovering his top laner in the side lane, or you'd see Mithy trying to look for a pick with Leona. So I think that's very good from them. And for EchoFox, like you said, I think they either skip steps in their vision setup, or their objective setup, or they get an objective and then they add a couple more steps, and then they get caught and the game is reversed.
Did you actually think that the roster moves they made, I mean, the smoothie pickup obviously is a pretty good one, like that's not really that debatable, but the other ones, one of the downsides obviously is, as you said, like Lost didn't play many games, and now you have them coming straight into a playoff series against very experienced players. Do you think that the roster moves were warranted? Like, did they need to make big changes in EchoFox?
I think... Oh, sorry, you go ahead.
Okay, thanks. I actually think that the weakness of EchoFox this year has been the org. Because, like, for instance, as I say, we fade as an org. It's not always PR, right? It's just if you watch, they invested a lot of money, right? You don't get Huni for cheap, for sure. They had like players with quite a good reputation. I would say tier 2 NA, which are pretty expensive as well in the market because you need to have NA talents. They went with like a coaching staff that showed pretty good strength during the spring split. And if you look at the record of the summer split, the coach left, so they had to do a coach replacement. They had to replace players many times. They ended up with like completely different structure at the end of the split from the beginning. And this has for sure a correlation, for instance, with Dardoch not playing around top lane. So they stopped playing around their strength, which is like Huni Dardoch, which was the core of the whole spring split. And I think that as an org, they're not even it's just speaking about the changes. There was too much changes to actually see a healthy atmosphere for players to perform, right? It's just then you just leverage on your raw talent of your players and their ability to shot call in the game, and that's how it gets messy. Where if you have a very good like management and I would say consistent work on specific axis of the game, you can always win, right? For instance, Clutch Spring Split, they were a late game team, they were team fighting, they were investing on it, we knew it. That was for sure a win condition for them. Echo Fox is actually early aggression and playing around Huni, but their playstyles changed and their roster changed in the middle of the split for no reason. No one knows still what happened, right? And it's on the org, right? So it's very hard to say it was a good or a bad choice because you don't know what's happening behind the stage. Maybe like the players don't get along with each other and so on. But I really think that as an org, they didn't succeed into building a healthy ecosystem for the players to perform.
I see where you're coming from, but at the same time, if you know that there are certain limitations of your team and your roster, and you have the opportunity to go for a play like switching out OpTic and Adrian for Lost and Smoothie, I think you take it. I think Lost is a really interesting pickup. I don't necessarily have as much experience watching him, but I know that at this point, OpTic is a bit of a known quantity in some of his champion pool and some of his play style. So if you feel like Lost is going to have a lot of opportunities to grow and develop where OpTic didn't necessarily, then I think that's a good choice to make. I think that Smoothie is definitely a good choice to make. I do know that Adrian is an easier case to make because I feel like his champion pool limitations are more widely known. Like his play style limitations are a bit more widely known. So pulling in Smoothie, of course, like that's something that you want to do. And when you have franchising at play, you're going to be an org that's thinking maybe in the long term. So I wouldn't necessarily say that these player changes are the big fault. I think that not being able to adjust to your changes in time might look bad now, but it might be better for them in the long term. I do think that Huni is almost always going to be a limitation in that regard, because the stuff that Nasser brought up about Huni is stuff that has been brought up about Huni since 2015 to an extent, which is like he's very reliant on topside jungle pressure to succeed in that regard. And maybe he developed this sort of predilection because he didn't trust his bot lanes, or he developed this predilection because those were the types of teams he was on. But now he kind of seems to be stuck in this mode. And maybe Echo Fox felt like they could still work on it. They could still change Huni, and they didn't want to be a one-dimensional team anymore. But it backfired on them, plus he got sick, plus all these other factors. So for me, is it a huge, like the question comes back to, is it a huge failure for Echo Fox with this roster to lose in the quarterfinals? I don't necessarily think it is at this point, because I think the failure happened way earlier when they weren't developing some of these fundamentals around mid to late game setups. And they weren't having these conversations and weren't working on those aspects of the game. I don't think the failures come in the roster change. I think the failures come in just like understanding how to play the game out as the game progressed, because that aspect of Echo Fox's play did not change, was not affected by the roster change at all. So
yeah, I think they knew that there was a ceiling with their previous roster. Especially when they played versus Team Liquid in the semifinals last spring, and they just got destroyed like 3-1 by Team Liquid in most of those games. But at the same time, they were still the second best team in that playoff run.
Sure.
So one could argue that you can include, like, I would do the Smoothie Adrian trade every time, but I think maybe Phoenix is a player more suited for Huni because he's like probably with Jensen one of the best laners, like specifically laning. He's one of the best mid laners in the NA LCS, and maybe that gives Huni the freedom to call his jungler a lot more. So maybe like I could contest like if they like you said, Huni has this playstyle, and I don't think you can probably ever change that. So do you pigeonhole yourself into making that playstyle the best for this split and to be able to get to Worlds, or do you try to diversify in the middle of the split and risk your opportunity to go to Worlds or do better in playoffs? So I think that's an interesting question. I'm not 100% sure what would have happened in the TSM series if they didn't make the roster changes, except for like Smoothie. They could have still lost it because the mistakes they did still kind of happened in spring as well. So
the thing
is
that
it enough? Sorry, I mean, I think that is it enough to go to Worlds at this point if you're an NA team? Because I feel like if you're an NA organization, you see how NA teams have performed at Worlds in the past, and you think to yourself like that, we want to do better. And I feel like if the Echofox team went to Worlds, they would be like, if the spring Echofox team went to Worlds, they would be like every other NA team, and they would just lose in almost every other NA team, and they would just lose in group stage.
Do you think they are similar to all the NA teams and or like the NA teams from before in terms of playstyle? I think she means
relative to the strength of how they would do in the tournament.
Yeah, how they would do at Worlds. You know. In terms of playstyle, no. I actually thought that Spring Echofox had a more interesting playstyle than this one does, and it was a more unique one, but I still think that if they went to Worlds, they would probably end up losing in group stage.
That was something that I was thinking about. Whether like how this, because we never really had an NA team that played this way and played very aggressive early game. Like we've always had, like a TSM lineups, the C9 lineups. They always played towards like the mid game, late game team fighting. So I wonder, and even like still this Echofox lineup, it would be interesting to watch them at Worlds because maybe this aggression can get them a few wins. I think they would obviously still fail versus the best teams, but they might. I can see them doing a bit better than
that's why
previous NA team.
The team I would have liked to have seen in the past is that tip team that had Rush when they had Zhao and Rush. Where it was like it wasn't like a bad roster, but the good thing was they just made shit happen. So it's like exciting to watch at least, even if you wouldn't have succeeded. You got a chance at it, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have had NA teams that go to Worlds that at least had a really aggressive split domestically, right? We've had, as he mentioned, like he mentioned Zhao, so I thought of the LMQ lineup. Was a team that had an aggressive split. We had the 2016 TSM lineup, which everyone like that entire season was saying, "Oh my God, they have the highest gold at 15 of any team in the world. Oh my God, TSM are so aggressive. Oh my God, they're so good." So I do think that we have had domestically aggressive teams make Worlds. Also, the Immortals lineup from last year, I think, was a fairly domestically, at least if you look at the
they
final.
They just proceed out in the actual Worlds, though.
Yeah, if you look at the final against TSM, like I think it's fair to say that we've had North American teams that are domestically look really aggressive, but then they go to Worlds and they don't play like that, or maybe they're unable to play like that internationally. So that's an interesting question.
Can I just clarify one thing before we move on? Right. I like the new addition to the repertoire of voices, but what is the new voice supposed to signify, Kelsey? Because normally, if it's a stupid fan, they go like, "Oh my God, what was I doing?" So what's sort of the lower tone one? What was that voice supposed to be?
Well, maybe that's the stats voice. I don't know.
Right.
Kind of make it up as they go.
It's like sort of like the nerd guy who's like, "Well, actually, 79% in-kill participation." Okay, it's that one. Right? I'm trying to just build the cast out because in time we're going to actually, thematically, to solve all the problems of our viewers and our requests, thematically we're going to become a radio show eventually. At which point we won't even have guests on. Kelsey will do all the voices. It'll just be me and her. She'll do like a cast of 1,000 characters. Kelsey's cavalcade. So there we go.
Yeah.
Right. So what were you going to pick up on something there, Empyre? It sounded like you want to say something still.
No, I think like I would still think that this Echo Fox would maybe play a bit like the way they play the early game is still a bit different than those teams. But I can still see that it would be the way they play is too inconsistent for the international stage, and they could play out the way that that TSM lineup and the LMQ lineup and so on played out.
I have just one remark on this, which is I think Echo Fox as a team, like all the changes, you spoke about Phoenix. I just want to come back on these points. I think that there is a big change between the spring Echo Fox and the summer Echo Fox, and the change of the mid laner, because Phoenix has a very narrow champion pool. That's something that everybody knows, and I think that's his limitation. But everybody agrees. I think among all the teams and all the mid laners I've spoken to during the split, agree that when he's on one of his champions, he's insanely strong at laning. Like I spoke with Tristan PoE, and sometimes it's like when this guy is, for instance, on his Rise, I played against a Rise Faker. This guy is close to Faker's Rise. He's insane. So he pulls the jungler, meaning that the jungler is going to gank the mid lane, because most of the teams in NA import the mid laner, so we don't play through mid. Bjergsen, Jensen, Poaf, Evil, even Feb, even playing through mid is something very common in NA. But Echo Fox was really strong because they can pull the jungler on Phoenix, who plays really strong on the lane alone, and then use the jungler to actually gank on top where the jungler is already around mid. It was a really common contemplate from Echo Fox. So the change from Phoenix, who can like play this defensive side, to Diamante, who is much more a classic rookie, NA mid laner rookie, even though it's very strong and very consistent across the board, has not this ability to actually pull the jungler in his lane, meaning that the jungler has a roam to actually match top lane, and then it's 2v2, and I don't think that Huni, especially with the current meta, Huni can like solo carry with Dardoch a 2v2, and it's more 50-50, so that's why the games are always very polarized with Echo Fox, because the first 2v2 top defines the state of the game for them, because Phoenix cannot like pull the jungler.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Like Echo Fox solo lanes just output so much pressure, and if you go to one lane, the other lane is gonna you're like Echo Fox is gonna get more advantages in one lane than you will, because they have these two high pressure points. And yeah, I think that's a really good point.
Okay. See, that's the problem though, when you let a player who has like a specific strength go, is like, if you let them go, they might play against you. And I know that was something they were worried about in the Echo Fox cat. So then Rick Fox said, let me take care of that. It was a meme about the fact that they fucked Phoenix on the last day of the transfer window. But anyway, whatever. It was lost. The fans will get it. That's all that matters, Empire. The fans will get it. That's what I'm really playing to here. Yeah, Kelsey, come on.
And just to solidify that point, people think of Echo Fox playing around top in spring as like the jungler was always in Huni's lane, but it was actually way more common for the first gank to be mid from Dardoch. And then after that, it's even if enemy team sends my jungler to topside, you have to think of it as, okay, my jungler and my top laner are playing 2v3 versus Huni, Dardoch, and Phoenix, because Phoenix and Dardoch just got this lead mid and they can roam on priority.
Yeah.
So I think that was
extremely hard to play against, actually.
I think that's a good way to kind of think of the situation, is that when you played against Echo Fox, it was 2v3 in almost all situations.
Yeah.
Right, one question I have is this. So I think Echo Fox has to be the perfect example of this as a team. So one thing that we've often talked about on this show and kind of criticised is the notion that like every team in League of Legends is this blank slate, and what you do is you read the global meta of how you're supposed to play League of Legends, and then it doesn't matter who the players are. You know, I mean, I've even heard players actually say like, forget the name of the player, it's just who the champion is, like, which is probably the stupidest concept I've ever heard of, but okay. And they act as if what you're meant to do is, you know, the players are just this fresh clay and you just mold them into whatever the right shape is and then send them out there and they're going to do well, right? Even if there are teams that can get away with that and can do that to some degree, I don't really understand what the point is of having Huni if you're then not going to just go all in and let him play his style. It's like, for me, you're going to ride or die with that player. And listen, give him his best chance. He is one of the few players where even when it's not a carry-oriented meta, could still do something. Whereas if you saw the result of this series, it's like you lose all hope if he's not playing the carries. So is there any point in having Huni if you're not going to do that? Or can you make a counter-argument there? Zaboutine, come on, as a coach, what would the counter-argument be?
like to be honest, I've tried. Like I think there is no point not putting a player on this trend. Like for instance, I have Dokla, and I think Dokla has really stand out this summer split as a carry player. And I think there's no point if the meta backs to tank. That's why having 10-man roster is sometimes useful, because on my academy I have a very strong tank player, and I think that's the thing is if you can manage, like as a coach, I think it's managing the ego and saying the player, you're going to go on the field. Like in traditional sports, it's like this: you're going to go on the field and you're going to play that like your play style to your best, because I need this right now. But if I don't need your play style, you're not going to play. And I think this is like the core of the management, saying to Huni, like right now, I need a blind Maokai player, someone who's just going to like gracefully die, and I don't need you. And then you pick a very good tank player, right? There is very cheap and good tank players in NA. Like Alorim, he used to be like working Echo Fox in Spring Split. This guy can play any tanks. Like I have him in my team. I'd rather like put Huni on the bench if I really need a tank and play a the different style. But yeah, if you put Huni on the field, if you put Huni like on stage, then giving a carry, put the jungler next to him and try to get something out of it. And if you fail giving your best shot at playing top carry than trying to force Huni into picking something that doesn't fit, not having the jungler and just feeding, because this is what Huni does, right? He literally runs it down. It's the most polarized player in the NA LCS. He can literally like solo lose a game.
I really wonder, because at some point, whenever we prepped against Echo Fox for stage, we're like, okay, Huni has like 20 different carry champions that he can pull out. We don't know what he's gonna pick. We can try banning this and this out, and then hopefully he doesn't pick like the worst counter matchup. Then we go on stage and he blind picks Cho'Gath. I'm like, wait, what? And then the weeks go by and he's like mostly playing tanks like Cho'Gath, Gnar, like not champions like he used to play in Spring, like the more hyper carry champions like Camille, Fiora, etc. And I wonder like what happened within the team. Like, can the team not function if he's on a carry that needs a lot of resource, or like I don't know. It was really weird. I think like something happened that
they changed the coach. They changed the coach.
Well, the coach was an assistant coach.
You know, if you actually look here, most games Camille wasn't banned. I think it was only banned one game, and it wasn't picked for Huni.
That's like we have the same thing, right? We had the Fiora. They flexed the Aatrox into the jungle for Dardog, and they have to pick on our Fiora. I expected something out of the box. They pick Rumble into Fiora, and I'm like, this is not possible. This is not Echo Fox. Something changed. As I'm saying it, I don't have like the grasp of what's going on backstage. I'm saying this is the only thing I can say about Echo Fox. They changed so many things during this year that you end up in Huni picking Rumble into Fiora, and that's the management, right? Because you know the player. You know the player. He will never ask like, give me my Rumble into a Fiora. He would never ask for it. He would give me Vayne top. Give me anything that can shit on this Fiora. I want the counter matchup. So if he's like selfless and goes for the team fight comp, it means that something changed, because it would never have happened in the spring split. That's for sure.
Honestly, I think he would. I think he would pick Rumble into Fiora, because like this is Huni and he thinks his Rumble is like insane, and also Rumble will have push, and if you have the jungler on that side of the map, then you can still do something with it to punish the Fioras. I think he would still pick Rumble to Fiora. Like Huni.
What about
Rumble.
this then? So
I don't know.
As we said, not only was the Camille not banned, but he didn't even really make many attempts at picking carries. Like if you go and watch LCK, not only did they play Camille, they play fucking Jace top. Let me think, what else?
Kennen,
Gangplank. You can even sort of like vaguely you can carry on that if you're a strong player. Like there was so many options. Yeah, obviously Kennen was played in this series. It was just played by Haunter, so it even does seem like some kind of either Huni's just changed his mind, as you say, and thought he could make it work, or the coaching staff's told him don't pick any of this stuff.
Yeah,
he picked Kennen in the last game. Yeah.
Yeah, but he like went AP, and that's also like an indication that he's going to play for the team fight, the team. So
yeah, I don't know what happened. I think that they probably decided to go all in on their bot lane, but I don't think you can do that with Huni on the team. I do agree that something changed, but I'm not really sure what. So
yeah, it was just a different Huni,
because Huni has had so many coaches, right? Huni's had so many coaches, and we've always like ultimately seen the same Huni. Like even in SKT, sure, initially he was playing like more tanks and stuff, but then eventually we see him playing Jace every game and stuff like this. So that makes you think that like if he's going to eventually stick to his guns, or the SKT coaching staff decides it's best for him to stick to his guns there, then you're not going to see a situation in NA where the coach has like this much of an impact on what Huni is doing. I'm not really sure. It's really interesting.
That's what's brilliant, Kelsey, is that like everyone obviously at that point in time had a lot of praise for Korma, because at that point in time his record was almost spotless. You know, he'd just come off winning like back-to-back worlds or whatever. He's even got most of the core of that team still there, like 3 of the players. He gets Huni and he's like, right, this is my new project. You know, I have to, obviously as a coach you always have to grow, try new things. I'm going to convert Huni to playing tanks. What do you know? It's worked. We've won the split. We've won MSI. I am the greatest coach of all time. What's happening? What the fuck? What's going wrong? Oh, fuck, can I put in on Thorin? That doesn't really work either. The rest of my team's gone to shit. At the end, Korma's last resort in the semi-finals of a Worlds was to just be like, fuck it, just do whatever he used to do in all the other teams and tell Peanut just go there 24/7 and basically either you're just going to win the game or he's just going to fucking power feed. And then he was like, yep, I'm going to power feed. I thought it was brilliant. Even Korma was like, that was all that he was left with in the end. It was like, as soon as Huni joins your team, it's like abandon hope, all ye who attempt to coach him. The sad thing is, there's actually like, his mindset from when I see interviews with him, actually, I think it's in line with what Kelsey said. I actually think he really believes he can do all this shit and play all these other champions and do all these picks that like other people don't understand. And he really reminds me, actually, there used to be a Counter-Strike player just like this, because just like Huni, in his own way, at his strengths, this guy was one of the best in the world. He was a Finnish player called Ruit, who played like 10 years ago or so. And the thing about him was he was a really skilled player, but he was just constantly aggressive. Not aggressive as in like, you know, I take this angle and then like, if I do it in an aggressive way. Like he would just literally push the game all the time. And so as a result, because his aim was sick, he could literally win you the game. Like he could just run all the team over and they could do nothing. And even better, like Huni, when he's running you over, it's so demoralizing. Like you even know it's coming, you know he's going to do it. You think, in your brain, in fact, the fact that it's so illogical that he'd keep pushing in scenarios where like, you know, you have low health or whatever, makes you think that when he does it and he gets away with it, it's like, what can we do against this? So it used to be really good for his team, but then the downside was just like Huni, he would have the same games he did that, but he wasn't on his game and he would just miss all the shots and he would just basically throw the game as well. He would just die over and over and over again. And this is the hilarious, like, the kicker to the story. So years later, the guy who was the in-game leader of this player in Counter-Strike is a very good friend of mine called Lurpus, who actually now works in the Immortals organization as like their general manager. And this is years after they stopped playing together. They met up for a drink and they were sort of reminiscing on old times, you know. And this Ruit guy, who, as I'm kind of hopefully painting the picture, even when he was succeeding, effectively was making mistakes. Like, you know, in Counter-Strike especially, by the way, if you like push forwards, get 2 kills uncontested, you definitely pull back then because you've got such a massive advantage in the game that you've almost like won the round basically for your team. But he would still push and be like, I'm going to get the 3rd one. And then the reason you couldn't criticize him is because you would have never told him to go for like the 2nd one in some scenarios, you know. So the fact that he had the genius to make it work, you had to kind of let him do it. Well, years later when they met in this bar, he actually said, with no tinge of irony to his voice, he said to him, you know, I was thinking back on my career, and I don't think I ever actually made many mistakes in my career when I played. Like, I think everything I did made sense. And his in-game leader was literally just looking at him like, Jesus Christ, like, you made all the mistakes, you idiot. Like, even the ones that you made, it's like, he was like, had that double-lift scenario where even when he made the mistake, like, you know, his skill mechanics just got him out of it. And then he thought, like, perfect move, calculated. It's like, that's not calculated. You're not supposed to be able to do that. So it's like, this is why I don't understand why in 2018 we're having discussions like, will Huni adapt, play tanks in the playoffs? Like, what do you think? Instead of just having these conversations, can you all just bet with me and I'll give you like even money odds or something?
So it's very like the mentality that like Huni isn't the only one. I think other players also have this mentality. One is like Forgiven, the other is Piglet. It's like,
sure,
this is the best way to play the game in their minds. And if you play towards them, then you're going to win the game. And that's how they think. And if you deviate from that, it's not their fault. It's not really their fault.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's your fault. Like, I'm the winning condition. If we do this, we're going to win this game.
Yeah, it's funny because I stopped, and this is where, because we talked earlier about how, you know, having been a journalist is like changes your perspective when you transfer. But this is where like having been a third-party content creator can help you in a coach or analyst role, because you realize that you can't just ask players like straightforward questions. You can't just ask them things like, so can you do this? Can you play Maokai into Gnar or something like this? You can't just ask them straightforward questions. You have to ask them how they will do it or how they will play this out, because one of my most memorable conversations with Huni when I was interviewing him when he was on SKT was, when do you push the lane, like in the mid to late game? Like, when do you push the side lane?
Was he like, yes?
Like some people, and he said, when you have TP.
There we go.
So always always push. And so that's like, that gives you the insight. And so if you're a coach of Huni, you ask him, how do you play this Kennen matchup when your jungler is on bot side? And if he says, I push, then you say, okay, we're not playing that then. This isn't how this is gonna go. So, or I use all of my abilities on the wave in Jace's face. That's how I play it.
By the way,
this isn't going to work, by the way.
Just for context, I'm pretty sure people know I'm not the biggest fan of Marin. I think he was a bit overhyped. But to be fair, when everyone used to say that about Marin and like paint them as if they're the same player, like they just push all the time, he did it about 1,000 times more intelligently, and he actually had an understanding of where the enemy jungler was. Like, fuck off. Like, they're not. There's a big difference there. If I had to blame Huni's career on one thing, I think it's just that he went straight to the West. Like, he never had the proper like breaking in process from the Korean coaches where they fucking bench you every time you don't do the right thing, and then if they bring you back, they ask you to do a specific thing in that one game. Like, that probably could have saved him. Whereas sadly, he had Daylor, who was just like, right, reign over, do everything he says. You're not drinking a Red Bull, are you, Feb? Huni, anyway. As I was saying, you're good, keep going. Steelback, shut the fuck up. You're a utility AD carry. Anyway, actually, maybe that was me again if I was coaching Fnatic. I might have confused the two there. So anyway, back to this series, because so far, we've now extended the Huni bashing session way too long, and we've almost never talked about TSM so far. They didn't win the series. So, right, has there been a change in Bjergsen the last few weeks into the playoffs? Because obviously, listen, he is in some ways the Danish Reckless. He's a very sensitive young man. Doesn't like criticism. Doesn't like to read Twitter because people might say stuff like, you lost us the game. And clearly, that's why I have a hard time, by the way, imagining these guys as like, they're fucking warriors in the game. It's like, they can't handle it when someone's like, you suck big game, Reckless. They're like, oh, but my feelings, that hurts, please. It's like, like, come on, man, warrior wouldn't be that. Wouldn't you just be like, fuck off, I don't care. So, has something changed in Bjergsen though? Because I have to say, when I watch these games, as much as I want TSM to lose, just for historical reasons, it's just something in my soul. I was kind of cheering when Bjergsen was going ham. Like, it was pretty fucking good, I can't lie. Has there been a change?
I think the change. So the game changed. The mid lane was a lot of blind picks with safe lanes, farming and scaling almost the whole year. There was this crazy moment when there was bruisers, and he was pretty good at it earlier, but beside that, he didn't have that much counter picks, so he was not in comfort situation. And now the meta is back. That's something that he really likes, meaning heavy counter pick mid lane. There's very low amount of champions that can like safely blind at least 1 or 2 blinds. So, but because people try to target as much as they can the bot lane because it's the weakness, right? Mithy is really good to target ban for most of the draft situation. He ends up with pretty good matchups, and he's pretty much in the zone. Syndra has been upped. She's the signature champion. He plays a lot of assassins. LeBlanc is back. There's Akali, so he can always stand with a very good win condition on his side, not his team side, his side. He can 1v9 the game if he has a good matchup, because it's the only lane that TSM always managed to win, just because of Bjergsen, because he's really strong at laning, not as strong as Jensen, for instance, but pretty strong and pretty reliable. And if he gets a counter pick, he can shot call then. He gets in the zone when he can shot call, control the game, control the vision, ask the side lane pressure to actually push or pull. So all these things, he can do it if he has the control on the 4, right? The 4 remaining men. And he's really good at that. So I think that the changes of the game allowed Bjergsen to play much more his play style, which is like a mid laner shot caller than in the past, where it was much more coming from, I would say, it was very core macro style. The early season, the meta was crazy, but the win conditions were very cold macro side, and now it's much more picked oriented with 1-3-1 and so on, and I think it fits him much more. And on top of that, I think he worked twice harder, and maybe the change of the coaching staff helped as well, like Song stepping down, Lost Boy getting out, Path coming back. I think he really likes these surroundings because he has always shown good performance where Path was around and so on. So I feel like there was a change in the coaching staff and in the game to help Bjergsen perform more at the end of the split.
I did appreciate, by the way, just for the sake of the narratives, that like this year was supposed to be Reginald's. Like, right, we've got franchising now. I've got that coach that wants to be a coach. You know, I'm going to stay back. I'm going to delegate everything. Fuck, it's going badly. Opens up his Rolodex. Get Path and fucking Weldon in it now. It's like, I just love it when when like memes become reality, basically. It's like he's reverse engineering memes for me, just personally, so I appreciate that. Right, okay, what did you think, Empyre? What was the difference for TSM?
Yeah, I think on this team specifically, and with the way the mid lane meta is right now, Bjergsen is really good at mastering champions and new champions and that come out, like Akali, Aurelia, and then he's always been really, really good on LeBlanc and Syndra. And those are all in the meta. And on this team, different from before, he needed to be the stable part of the team. Whereas now with Sven and Mithy, yeah, Mithy has his bad parts outside of lane, but in lane, Sven and Mithy, like they never lose. And if they lose, they like lose really gracefully. And Hanser as well, he's not like the best laner, but he also doesn't like hard lose his lane. And because in this meta, Bjergsen can get the counter pick, he can express his skill a lot more. And it feels like he mentioned in an interview after the series where like the team kind of requires him to make these plays and to get these picks and to express his skill a lot more in the game. And like that's what we're seeing right now. I think when he's put in that situation, he's a lot less afraid to go like play a lot more aggressive with these assassin carry picks. Whereas before, when he's like put on like Azir or Orianna, he has to sit back and just wait for his team to do stuff. But now he's on like LeBlanc, Aurelia. He's the first one in the team fight, and he's the one that is making like the first or the second play in these skirmishes and fights.
A lot of it, I think, comes back to how they use the jungler as well, because Bjergsen will just push the lane if he's on like a mage clearing, but he'll often not necessarily coordinate with his jungler, but take the responsibility of the jungler. Like there were so many games in the series where Greg was effectively just giving up every scuttle. He was full clearing and backing, and then Dardoch was getting like some early vision in his jungle, and he just was not effective. But then if you missed Bjergsen like pushing in mid and then going topside or something like this, then that was a really effective way for TSM to make something happen so that they could stay in the game even when so many other things were going wrong for them in the early game. And a lot of the champions that were in the meta early on were just like super straightforward champs, right? You had to an extent like some of the Swain, you had the like Aurelia was overpowered, you had Zoe that is just gonna like kind of clear and then look for Qs and stuff like this, and then you have matchups that feel less like clear matchups, and now you have matchups that are more reliant on skill. You have like your Orianna versus Ryze, you have these types of matchups, Orianna versus Syndra, these types of matches that are coming out more. So I think that would really suit a player with a team with a strong mid laner like TSM.
Okay, right. On that topic then, so obviously a topic of discussion in the split was the jungle position at TSM, because they obviously had Mike Young before, and then they made the swap to Greg. And I mean, I'm just going to say, I think neither of them looked like very good junglers in TSM. Greg seemed okay, and then again, that's just because he played fucking Trundle half the game, so I don't really know how much I can really put on that. This series right here, you know that like meme that everyone says, Zaboutine, like, oh, better jungler wins. Like this series is like objective proof that the better jungler doesn't win for me. Like it doesn't seem like Greg did particularly well. What do you think of how they're using Greg in TSM?
I think Greg is the example of how Riot destroyed the jungler. I think jungle is a place where it's very hard to express yourself right now. Like Dardoch, like when you see a player of the caliber of Dardoch, he has his counts and his weaknesses as a player for sure. I think he's like the same style as Huni. He wants to play through him and so on, which is sometimes annoying because you want to play somewhere else on the map. But it's very, like, I think it's always bad if the jungler is limited to like outpushes, small ganks, and just farming, like power farming with like no control, like low vision control, which is what Riot desired it to be. So now we're in the state where, like, I don't accept. I don't say Greeny is bad because I don't think that any point is bad, but he's very, very one-dimensional as a jungler, right? He's just being called here and there, outpush, just come back in the jungle, match the 2v2, played pretty well. Whereas it's very hard to make a proactive play in the jungle right now. It's either cheese, either you just do what you should be doing. And I think that the better jungler doesn't win anymore. It's just, if you don't do the bare minimum or you try to gamble, you can lose the game on your own as a jungler. But if you do exactly what you should be doing, without any kind of cheeses or like very, very creative play, like jungle doesn't matter. Jungle doesn't matter at this point. It's just supportive role that just make sure that the lane are not falling, like crushing. If you have strong laners, for sure, of course. If laners are even, jungler doesn't matter. So that's why I think better jungler didn't win in the series, because it's very hard to impact the map now, the game, especially with the champion pool right now. Like, what do you want to do with Predator Gragas? You can gank 7 times the same lane, right, playing the max floor style. But if you really want to play the jungle the way it should be, it's very low impact. It's like one gank top, one gank in bot, and then you just go on your strong side. You just camp the strong side in a way that you can actually like zone the game from the turret, get the turret, swap, this kind of stuff. And that's very basic. I really think that the jungle position has been destroyed, kind of. I don't know what, like, if Kelsey and us think about it. Maybe I have a very skewed approach of it, but that's how I feel about the jungle right now in League of Legends.
I think there are still a lot of opportunities to be sort of creative with the jungle, or to make sure that you're kind of starving out the jungler. Like, prioritizing both scuttles early, I think, kind of really limits the other options that the enemy jungler has. However, if I'm a team like TSM against a team like Echofox, and I've done my research and I've done my scouting, I'm going to be perfectly happy picking Sejuani first rotation every game, or Sejuani Trundle first rotation every game, because I know my jungler is going to have like much more impact mid to late than picking like a super aggressive clear jungler. Like a jungler pick like Olaf or Kindred, I think can still have a massive impact by like winning almost every 2v2 or things like, obviously Trundle can be very strong in that regard as well. But as we saw in the series, but it's just like as the game progresses, if you don't have good vision, if you're not using side lane pressure as effectively as you could, then you're going to be in a position where one Sejuani ultimate or one catch off from a Trundle pillar is going to completely turn your game around, and you're going to lose the team fight. So I think that's the approach that TSM took here. And so looking specifically at what Greg did early isn't really indicative of how the series played, because I feel like regardless of picks or regardless of how the series went, and then so much the analyst desk covered like pick ban, and I just felt like it didn't matter how TSM and Echofox changed up their draft, because it was always like insane leads through Echofox playing out early well, and then an overextension or poor vision or just like a bad reset or a collapse on one side of the map, and the game completely turned for TSM. And Greg was part of that because he was playing good engage picks and things like this. So yeah,
I will say, in line with that video I made about like talk shows and why they fail, etc., people who do analyst desks understand that no matter what fans tell you on Reddit, 99% of people don't give a flying fuck about the veto once the game ends. Like, they just say that they pick ban when they're being an idiot, like, oh, I should have picked the hero that he's really good at. Like, that's not even analysis. They don't really care about that. It's way better, in my opinion, to just explain what the guy did wrong with the thing that you think he picked bad. It's not very interesting to be like, but if we could go back in time, it's like, we can't. So that's like not really that great a topic to talk about, really. Especially not after the game. Like, if it was like Dota and you had like 20 minutes, you could be like, well, with these picks, yeah, do it there, but not otherwise. So on the flip side of this, in certain points of this split, people had Dardoch as potential MVP of the entire league. One of the main reasons Echo Fox was so good. Admittedly, some of that was when Funnel existed. What do you think of, like, was he actually good enough in this series? Is this team just, I mean, is it too heavy? Can he not carry it? Is it a bad spot for him? Where are we going with this?
I think Dardoch is a player that, like, he's really, really good and he's super talented. But when the game is close, he wants to make that game-winning play and
wants to be a hero, yeah.
Yeah, and like it feels like he has no other choice but to go for a super aggressive play, and like he thinks about it in his mind, like, yeah, this is gonna work, and then it doesn't work. So a lot of the times, at least in this series, and the split overall, like I feel like because Echo Fox were struggling in their macro game when they had their leads, it forced Dardoch to overstep. Like, you remember Dardoch on CLG last year, how he played? He would like gank Pobelter's lane and then give the enemy mid laner a kill. And I feel like it's similar to that.
Immortals, you mean?
CLG, when he got traded CLG.
So that was Huni then. Pobelter's
yeah.
Immortals.
Oh yeah, sorry, yeah.
Okay, I was just confused about that part. Okay.
Yeah, because Pobelter used to be on CLG. Anyways, but yeah. Basically, I think that when the game is close or he feels like he needs to do something to get his team on track to winning the game, he gets tunnel vision to make a play, and then that play sometimes doesn't work out. And I think that's his downfall in terms of like his play
It's any
style.
jungler mentality. I think it's any jungler mentality. It's a whole thing with any junglers. Like, after working with some junglers, they all think because you get selected to LCS because you're top jungler, and most of the top junglers in NA LCS, like solo queue, play carries, so they try to make the proactive play, right? Whereas jungler is more a supportive role, right? You have to know where you have to be and like pull the trigger at the right moment, and it's really played well around vision. It's the whole thing in competitive as a jungler is playing around vision. I think, for instance, Lyra is like a master in playing around vision. He has shown, like, with Kindred, and even early during the spring split, he was really strong around that. So I truly think that they don't understand. Like, most of the NA junglers don't understand. And if Dardoch is the prime example of like the guy that maybe among all these guys has the highest skill cap and the bigger talent pool, but at the same time doesn't understand that the victory in the control of the game is not on him. It's like a step-by-step game, especially League of Legends, where you have to set up your play and then you have to play just your own piece of the puzzle of the big picture and just stick to it. And because he gets frantic when nothing happens, it's like, I'm going to carry this game, like in solo queue, because this is what all the NA junglers are doing in solo queue. They just pick an aggressive jungler and they try to win the game. And this 1v9 mentality is terrible for the West, and it's even more terrible in NA, and it's even more terrible in jungle. So I think Dardoch is just a prime product of this mentality.
Yeah, but the problem is, as long as Rainover's on fucking CLG, they're never going to learn, are they? They've got to actually lose before they're going to learn. That's the problem. And then TSM just goes to Worlds every year without a jungler. So again, how are they supposed to learn? Where's the example?
And then, when they lose, it will be Gwigny's fault. You know it for sure. You know it for Thorin. It's for sure. Yeah. It's Gwigny's fault. He was too young. Yep. We bring back higher Rainover, please. Higher Rainover, and then
100% next year, TSM will have a different jungler.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, they still, we've talked about this in so many variations. I think
still keeps happening though.
Yeah, I mean, I think Zyrene did say it best though, where TSM's mentality is the jungler plays around every lane at different times, whereas the correct mentality is we should be enabling our jungler if we want our jungler to make plays. So
yeah, so a lot of people should talk Lyra this year about like how he plays the game, but I think the way he plays the game is the correct way, where like in Korea, when they're teaching jungle, they always teach jungle like the lanes need to empower the jungler, because if you empower the jungler, you fuck the enemy jungler so hard, and when you fuck the enemy jungler, you fuck the enemy laners. And I think NA doesn't understand how to play that way, and I think that's why you see like Lyra failing this year a lot.
Okay.
I think Lyra is doing great personally.
Yeah, but like the community has been trashing him all year.
Yeah, but which part in the community? Because like I can bring like my players from the next room and ask them like openly if they like Lyra, and everybody would say Lyra is an amazing jungler, man.
Yeah,
Lyra is an amazing jungler. We all think that he's an amazing jungler, actually. So
yeah, like players and coaches in the LCS will probably know that Lyra is good, but the outside community like have rated him low. Like there's like been jungle tier lists where he's like bottom, like lower than contracts, for example. Sure. I'm like
that is also, by the way,
when you just rate how your team is doing in the LCS.
You have to understand that stuff goes entirely on narratives. Like, one of the bad things about Reddit is it really is an echo chamber. So because people only see the upvoted comments because the other ones disappear, what happens is when they see a comment enough times, it's like that fucking old meme where that guy's like, you made this? He's like, I made this. It's like, that's all they're doing on Reddit, is like they're reading it. And then once they've read it enough times, they then start to think that's the consensus, so they repeat it. So for example, you pick the two best examples right there, Empyre, because the problem is everyone just remembers Lyra right after they changed from Envious, where at first he wasn't looking that good and the rest of the team was looking good, and they were like, oh, he only looked good because he was in a shit team and he was trying to hard carry. Meanwhile, I can't even believe that we're this far into the Golden Guardians project and people still act like it's week 2 of contracts on Cloud9 and they're like, he's so fucking good, he's an up-and-coming player, TSM should sign him. It's like, and I even saw some people saying, it's unfair, Golden Guardians, he's really good when all 3 lanes are winning. It's like, what the fuck is what is your expectation of a jungler? Like, I can play the game if all 3 lanes are winning. It all sound like, well, that'll probably just happen every game. Then, yeah, get him on SK Telecom. What are you talking about? Contracts has to be the best one for that. It's like, this guy didn't even do anything. He just played like half a good split. That was it. And yeah. 3 years, like 2 years later or something, everything's like, yeah, really good player. Right, okay, what about this then? Let's move forwards. Now TSM plays against Cloud9 in the semi-finals. What do you think about this one, Empyre? Who's going to win this matchup?
So I was thinking about C9 earlier today. I'm like, how did they win their games? So I actually looked back at their games and it's like, C9 is really weird because it feels like they just fight all the time and they're kind of like Echo Fox, but they have the best skilled players and the best laners in the team now, in the league now. Like Licorice, Jensen are super, super good at laning, probably the best in their roles right now in terms of performance. And basically just what happens, I feel like they just outplay the enemy in skirmishes and fights. And I know that sounds like really reductive, but from what I'm seeing, like that's what happens. I don't really see too much macro. I don't really see them playing a lot for like invades and for dives. It's like whenever they can find a good fight, they just go for it and they outplay the enemy. Even if they're behind by a couple of gold, they like versus TSM or versus Echo Fox, they just, okay, Echo Fox wants to fight, let's fight. And they end up outperforming them in that team fight. I don't know if Zaboutine or Kelsey have like similar views on that.
I scrimmed them quite a lot recently, so I have much more aspect of like how they play. But yeah, let Kelsey first. Let's go, Kelsey.
Yeah, I mean, I do think we've seen iterations of kind of the same Cloud9 for ages. I think that the jungler is an interesting element because depending on whether they have Blubberfish or Sunscaran, they tend to play slightly differently, but I do still think it's like the problem I've always had with C9, it's like one lane can support the jungler at a time. So either he's playing with bot or he's playing with mid or he's playing with top, and there's never necessarily a coordinated team effort until you get to fights. And usually like the reason why their fights are successful is because their vision control and the way that they're using like the lanes to come and place the vision before the fights is really good. But I think that since Smoothie left, that hasn't been as strong. So for me, I just still feel like Cloud9 is a bit of a confused team, and a lot of their success is coming out of the fact that a lot of teams around them are really scattered. So that's kind of my thought process on Cloud9 lately.
So I think we are one of the only teams at OpTic that beat TSM, the Cloud9 in the second part of the split, where they had this insane record. I don't think like they're unbeatable. First, I think we had a good record against them because we have very good strong mid laner. I think PoE matches against in terms of laning, and that's the thing is. I always speak about NA. Everybody asks me why NA is so bad and why some teams are strong. I'm like, because NA is always a 3-2. It's like either you have 3 strong players and 2 like tier 2, or you have 3 tier 2 and 2 strongs, right? Depending on how much you can import and how many local. There is not that many like local NA talents. Cloud9 is a prime example of they're having pretty much a 4-1, right? Or a 3-2, but a very strong 3-2 because they have Jensen, Sneaky, and Licorice that are very, very strong players. And then they help with top-level rookies, such as Blabberfish. I worked with him in Scouting Grounds. I really wanted to work with him during the season. This guy, he's learning really fast. He's learning really, really fast. The thing is, you make a remark and he immediately includes it into his play. So it's very easy to work with him. And Zaza, who is much more a laner, I would say, than Smoothie, which is much more like diverse, who is going to develop lots of things in this game in the future because it's just his first split as a top level pro. And I think Cloud9 is just a team that's pressuring 3 lanes at once and can play around 3 lanes. And it's so hard to draft, right? Especially with the new meta where like there's so many counter picks on every lane. This is just their thing is you have to, for instance, you go and draft against them and you have to cover the Zilean pick. Covering the Zilean pick in a draft is hard, right? But you don't want to ban it, especially if you're red side, for instance. And you end up in a shitty situation where they have the Zilean and they play really well around it because I think Jensen is the best Zilean. And you have to deal with it, right? You have to prepare a strategy anti-Zilean. And then the next game, they're going to play around top with Licorice. And super hard because Licorice is a very like insane laner. But they can as well like run it down through the bot lane. And for me, the only reason why Cloud9 looks so good, it's not because they are smarter. It's just because overall the talent pool is higher than any other team in the LCS right now.
Yeah, so that's why I liken them to Equifox, is because they like bot is slightly weaker in laning, but they're still super strong. But overall, they have like 2 and sometimes when they're on their game 3 pressure points in the game. And when you have 3 pressure points, if the enemy goes and ganks bot lane, then Jensen and Licorice are going to, like, the jungler is going to help Jensen and Licorice, and if those guys are ahead, they can absolutely carry the game.
I actually think it's a team that is going to look insane till Worlds. It's going to look insane. I'm rooting for Cloud9 because I think that the management did a good job and the scouting did a good job the last 3 years, and they have to like kind of being paid for like the good investment they made in the past. And I think it's good, like, because it's a good signal for all the markets, like all the EU and NA, how to say, like for the whole business, having a team that has a proper management is a good prime example that they should win for that. But I think at Worlds, especially for instance against the Chinese team, I think they would see limitation, especially from the jungle and supports. Jungle support synergy at Worlds is like all that matters because jungle support synergy is vision, and you need vision to actually prepare your plans. Because if you face shake once at Worlds, you're just dead. If you overstep, you don't reset once, you just lose the game. So I'm pretty sure that the team will look really strong till Worlds.
And Blabber is good, but he's also still like every time any rookie jungler gets into the league, they have like an insane streak of carry performances, and then they kind of teeter off. And he has the same playstyle that Zaboutine was mentioning earlier, where they're a carry jungler from solo queue. They come on stage, they play these carry games, and then they always think that they always play super aggressive, and then they end up getting caught. And I think you see some of that in Blabber's play. And even when C9 talk about him, they say he's a wild card. Sometimes he goes into the enemy jungle and he ints it, and we saw that a couple of times, but not as much as it seems to be more controlled on stage than maybe it is in scrims. But that is something that you're kind of worried about when they go internationally. Like, how is he going to match up against all these top level junglers, and how is this team going to match up against those international teams if they make it to Worlds? Can they just rely on laning and team fighting, or are they going to end up developing some of their weak macro?
Honestly, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh yeah, just like
I
around
thought you had
vision.
finished your point. Yeah.
Yeah, just like around vision and like setting up objectives. Like, are they going to develop that?
Honestly, I think part of the reason why rookie junglers look so good in NA is because when you first bring one in, it's like a change of environment, and it's almost like this expectation of, we can't really expect him to understand team play that well, so we'll back him up more and we'll take more of the burden of team play. But as he gets more and more inoculated into the team environment, you kind of expect him to play to the lanes more, and that's when I think things go wrong. And that's when you see like all this insane standout jungler, like, because his laners are backing him up and he's taking charge and he's making the aggressive plays, and then he ints a bit and it's okay, well we'll teach you some team play. Instead of making this like a more back and forth situation, it just ends up going completely the other way. And I think that ends up being a problem with a lot of junglers in NA, and particularly TSM junglers. So.
This principle actually exists very famously in Counter-Strike, which is in Counter-Strike, because there's no like poaching rules and there's obviously no like off-season in the same way, you can do roster moves anytime you want, basically. As long as you can afford the player, as long as he wants to go and as long as the org lets him go, you can do a roster move. So as a result, most top teams in Counter-Strike do a roster move, I would guess, on average every 9 months. Even the best teams in the world, you know, rarely make it a year. Well, the principle that exists in Counter-Strike is called the honeymoon effect, where when you first put your new roster together, you almost always have, like, really, if you're going to be a good team, you have those good results within the first, like, 2 or 3 lands you go to. And one of the reasons why is what you're outlining there, basically, Kelsey. What happens is, when you kick a player from your team, usually you kicked him because, you know, towards the end it was going bad, and then eventually it goes really bad, and so you kick him. So when you kick him, you're so focused on what he couldn't do and what he was doing badly that you just see all the negatives that guy brought. So when you bring in the new player, as you're saying here, like, you think to yourself, come on, this is the new guy, you know, he's not going to overnight know everything we want him to do. So what you tend to do is you initially over-prioritize him. Like, you give him everything he wants, you give him something he's comfortable at, you let him play like that. So initially, it all works really well. But the moment that always kicks in that decides if you're actually going to be a legit top team, or if it was the honeymoon effect, you know, and you're going to go back down to being worse, is unless this guy really is like some revelation, he's the best player in your team, and it's so clear you should do everything through him, well, eventually, he just becomes another teammate, and obviously you don't win every tournament, and eventually someone just says, well, wait a minute, I am the best player in this team, so actually I want all the things back that I was doing, and in fact, usually what they do is they just revert back to whatever they did before that was working with the rest of the players, and that player, like, you know, they don't always end up becoming shit, but, you know, you've just become, like, marginally better, you don't become way better. There's actually a similar principle I could very quickly explain. Sadly, you have to have played an FPS game to get this, it won't work in League, but because in FPS games it's so much about precision, famously, people who aren't good players make the cardinal sin of fucking around with the sensitivity that they use on their mouse all the time. And the reason why they do it, even though what they don't understand is, if you actually look at all the pros in Counter-Strike, they cover the entire spectrum of sensitivities you can have. Super high sensitivity, like a small mouse pad, massive mouse pad, low sensitivity. It doesn't actually basically matter. It just matters whatever feels comfortable. You stick with it, though. That's what the scrub fan never realizes. So the idiot fan changes his sensitivity all the time, because what happens is, the same thing happens. When you change your sensitivity, say you had a low sensitivity and you go to a high one, well, what will happen is when you play, you're going to hit some shots that you couldn't have with the low sensitivity because you've got a really high one now. And so the few times you get a kill, in your brain, you think like, oh shit, I've cracked it. Like, I'm better in this way. And it's like, you're not, because actually you're only better in what high sensitivity helps you with. And now when you try doing all the things you used to be better at with low sensitivity, you'll be worse. So inevitably, same thing happens. You do it for a week. When it drops off because you've actually got a sample size and you realise this doesn't help at all, you just go back to whatever you used to do. So that's, in essence, I didn't once mention TSM or their junglers, but I've sort of just explained everything about TSM and their junglers. Right, what about this then? So no one actually predicted. Based on everything you said, you're all predicting Cloud9 to win, presumably.
I think what you summarized pretty well, the Pygmalion effect, right? I don't know if you know it, like what you look at bigger. It's pretty much what you, when someone's a new come in, you just look at their strength because it's new tools, yes. You want to play with it, and then you start looking at the weaknesses. And I think that's the role of the coaching staff to actually try to reinforce positively every player. That's the same thing as Huni with playing with his strengths. That's the same thing with Dardog. That's the same thing with, like, that's always how do you put your player and how do you like build a team around like different strengths that actually, you know, clicks together instead of And I think that Blabber fits because he's very aggressive, to come back to the Cloud9 topic, because he's very aggressive and has 3 winning lanes. So it's the best, like it's the same as Contracts. It's literally the same story. You are actually mocking like the fact that the fans are fan of Contracts, but that's the same story. Blabber's arrived here, he has a pretty good knowledge of the jungle, has a lot of confidence because every mate is trying to reinforce his strength. So whenever he makes a good move, he gets 10 times better like feedback than when he makes a bad one. So he doesn't really look at his bad one. So he's always like eager to try. And he has 3 winning lanes. So for him, it's like the best playground to actually like start in LCS. But wait for the losses, right? Yes. Wait for the losses. The moment Cloud9 will start losing, it was like, but Blabber, why were you there? Like, why are you in the jungle? We lost the game because of that. And yes, I know, but usually, yes, but we keep saying this to you, like, stop it now. And then we'll start getting mad at him. And then it would be very hard for Blabber because he won't understand, right? You can't like being praised 24/7 and suddenly like being the liability of your team. So you have to be very careful, but I think that the honeymoon will last it worse, personally.
Yeah, I think Blabber is a positive for how C9 is playing right now. His team fighting on the champions he's picking right now is really, really good, and he has a lot of support from his team. Like sometimes Jensen picks Zillion or Lulu for him. So he's always in a position to express his skill in these team fights, and it's working out well. But then again, like Zaboutine said, and he is emphasizing a lot more on carry picks. And the one game they did lose versus OpTic, what did he play? He played Sejuani. So I think this is a honeymoon phase, and I think it'll last maybe, and it'll help them qualify for Worlds. But for this specific series versus TSM, I'm actually unsure of who the winner is. I think it's going to be a 3-2. And I'm over the fence on whether it's going to be TSM or C9 because...
Okay, give us some reasons as to why TSM could win then.
Yeah, so if C9 can... if TSM can withstand the early game laning and the early game aggression from C9 the way they did with Echo Fox, and they can stabilize the game by, making the counterplay or picking them out if they, if Blabber does end up overstepping, because he has done that a few times in their games, then they might get to the point where it's 5v5. And sure, C9 in the latter half have been the best team fighting team, but I won't put it against TSM with Sven, with Bjergsen. If they're on champions they're super comfortable on, I wouldn't put past them if it gets those 5v5 fights of them winning those games, because that's what TSM wants. They want mid to late game team fighting, and if C9 are not going to establish vision and objective control very well, and they opt for fights that aren't super favorable for them, like maybe it's 70-30 or 60-40 for them, and they opt for these more risky fights, I can see TSM winning these fights and then closing out the game. So that's why I think the series is going to be super close, because I think that's TSM is going to be able to put themselves, or C9 is going to let them be in the position that TSM wants, which is 5v5 mid to late game team fighting.
Kelsey, who's going to win this series?
Yeah, I actually have TSM. I think it is kind of TSM favored, and I outlined kind of my thoughts on the default TSM playstyle, and since then they've been able to do more stuff around mid lane, but my perspective on the default TSM playstyle is just like good defensive vision, wait for them to invade and collapse on them. And that was a lot of stuff that they were doing like towards the beginning of the latter half of the summer split. So this is kind of what I expect to see from them if things get difficult. And I think that works actually pretty well into what C9 are doing. And their C9's understanding of vision and mid to late game setups has definitely declined since Smoothie left the roster. So I actually do think that this should be, I would expect TSM to win this series. So I do think it will be close.
Zaboutine, who are you going for? Right?
I think C9 will win because TSM has weak laning right now. Besides, I don't think bot lane is that dominant, even though Sven is looking better. I actually think Zazel will go for hard counter picks on mid and try to win bot. And if they win bot, they will win the game because all the lanes can't be beaten by TSM's one. So yeah, I look forward for a win from Cloud9. Probably a 3-2 still. I think it's going to be close.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a lot similar to Xbox, where C9 is going to have the ball on their field, and then it just depends on how C9, what C9 does with that ball, with those early leads. So I think it's C9 favored in that sense, but I also think, I'm just like over the fence, but I think I give the edge to TSM, like 3-2 TSM.
So on the other side of the bracket, we had probably one of the most uninspired fucking playoff matchups I've seen in many, many years. Like, I didn't even have any hope going into this one. So it was 100 Thieves versus FlyQuest. As I joked about earlier, no one really knows how FlyQuest won any of their fucking games this split. It's still a mystery, I think, even to FlyQuest. Meanwhile, for everything you might criticise about 100 Thieves, they typically looked like they had a pretty good mid-game, decent enough macro. Did anyone think that FlyQuest had a chance in this series? Like, was there any hope to be held out?
No.
Nope. I think FlyQuest, they had like a nice little run in the middle of the split where they, like, FlyQuest as a team is their sum is greater than their parts. They don't really have any star players except maybe Flame. And then outside of that, I think like they're one of those teams that every split you have, that they find these comfort comps and they're able to get them a few games in a row before the enemy team figures out what play style, what comps they kind of go for. And the style that they kind of got, they got like a lot of Trundle, they got Rumble, so Flame can flex on the enemy top laner and do those sick rumble ults and team fights. They used a lot of Tahm Kench and Braum. They were really good using Tahm Kench for side lane plays and side lane control. But then two of those, Rumble and Trundle, started getting banned against them. Rumble was banned every game versus them yesterday. Tahm got a hard nerf and no one's really playing him anymore. And after that happened, they're like, okay, so what do we play now? And they had only 2 weeks to figure it out for playoffs. And I think they weren't able to find another comp or another playstyle that they can play as effectively. And maybe if they had enough more prep time, they could have found something else. But I think with the short amount of time they had, they wouldn't be able to find another comp and know how to play it versus 100 Thieves.
And on the other hand,
interesting to say about this series?
Oh, sorry. Go.
Yeah, go on.
I'm just saying, on the other hand, Thieves is just the strongest, I think, the most consistent team with Team Liquid this year, and it's just hard to beat. Like, I think as I can relate, it's just hard to beat Team Liquid just because they have Someday that he's just an enhanced version of Huni, much more like versatile, much more like I would say intelligent in the way he plays, and so hard to play against them. They have laners are strong, macro is good, atmosphere seems to be pretty good. They're confident and they always flip a game. Even when you're winning against them, you're afraid of them actually flipping the game. So I didn't expect. It's very hard to win against them overall. Yeah,
I think a lot of it comes from their veterancy. They have like a lot of veterans and a lot of not necessarily like super knowledgeable, but they kind of know how to make a bad situation into a good one. And whenever they're like behind or the game is even and they notice, their players are smart enough to notice like a macro error by the enemy team. For example, in the FlyQuest series, in the third game, FlyQuest sent 3 people bottom when Baron is about to be spawned, and they're like, oh, we're just going to 5-man this Baron right now and force them to come into us. They got the Baron, even though they lost the fight afterwards and they got aced. I think them getting Baron really hurt FlyQuest's 1-3-1, because if FlyQuest had 1-3-1 and Baron that early, it would have been really, really bad for 100 Thieves. But them just securing that Baron and noticing that the enemy was doing something really stupid, I don't think a lot of teams would have went for that 20-minute Baron in NA. But 100 Thieves have a lot of quite a few knowledgeable players to make that play.
There are a few things that I think FlyQuest are good at. One is just having their jungler waste the enemy jungler's time. And by that, I don't necessarily mean like counter jungling super hard, but just like the presence of Thorin in the enemy jungler, and you don't know if he's going to go for the 1v1. You don't know if he's going to go for the blue of steel. It's just like kind of wasting time there. And then another aspect that FlyQuest are good at are reactive play. And Snazore sort of highlighted this when he talked about their reliance on Tahm Kench, where it's just like if something is happening on one side of the map, they will come and collapse and they'll turn that type of fight, or they'll come and they'll run to the enemy team's other side of the map and they'll take the game if you're doing a base race when you shouldn't be doing that type of situation in TSM's case. So like those two aspects I think of FlyQuest are good. But in 100 Thieves case, they picked compositions where if you're wasting time and you're just stalling time for both sides of the team, then like this will help 100 Thieves. And then also like 100 Thieves reactive instincts are just better than FlyQuest's. So I think this was a really difficult game for them to win.
You know, actually, looping back, thinking about someday, looping back to what we started the episode with, where I was talking about that thing where Zaboutine said that tweet of like, you know, talking shit, is it like a hobby? I have to say, if it was a hobby, I'm a lot better at it than everyone on fucking Reddit, because when people constantly meme and bring up that Monte Cristo tweet, they're so shit at trash talk, they can't even like do it in a way that's coherent. So remember, the tweet from Monty said, now I'm not going to get it word for word, but the gist of it said something like, you know, I look forward to seeing how Lolo and Hauntzer do in an era of Korean tops in the LCS. And first of all, I believe he actually said that, I think before Hauntzer had actually gone to TSM. I could be wrong on that. So it might have been when Hauntzer, because it's when he just played on Gravity, if you remember. And obviously they just brought Lolo into the league or whatever. I think that was the timing of when he said it. Now, what people always forget when they meme on this comment is, first of all, they just delete the word Lolo from that tweet. Like, they love to laugh at the tweet, but they never bring up Lolo, because guess what? That ship fucking sailed a long time ago. Steve Arneset trying to say to Kelsey Moser, like, the year isn't over, could still be the year of launch. Shut the fuck up and get your checkbook out. Like, the only thing I need to hear from you is, I'm covering this meal. Like, we don't need to hear that. So anyway, ignore that part. They never ring up Hauntzer, because by the way, Flame, Someday, pretty much every Korean top's outperformed Lolo. So we forget that one. They always just make it basically as though his tweet said, Hauntzer will be worse than Seraph forever. That's basically the way they meme on that tweet. Because last thing I remember was like Flame and Someday have been two of the best tops in the LCS for like 3 splits basically now. Meanwhile, Hauntzer has gone from, everyone was saying this guy was a fucking MVP in 2016. I don't hear anyone saying he's the best now. What, magically his team getting worse made him worse, did it? What a surprise. He also plays with some of the best players of all time from the West. Still doesn't get criticism whatsoever. And Someday was comparable, if not better than Hauntzer, when Hauntzer had by far the best team, and Someday had the very bot lane that Echo Fox just said, you will never play League of Legends again. End of case, right? I should really have made that in my own video there. Could have been the whole thing there, but whatever. It was a little rant. It's just got a little rant off Empyre. You know how I do this thing.
Yeah, I think Licorice is what Hauntzer...
That would be a better one to pick, right?
Yeah, like Licorice, well, back when he was in Challenger last year with EU United, Impact, from hearing from the C9 guys, like Impact was asked to scrim with the United because he thought Licorice was really, really good. And I think Licorice actually has a lot of respect, gets a lot of respect from the Korean top laners, where I think the Korean top players don't really care too much about like Hauntzer. Like they don't really mention him as one of like the top laners in the LCS.
Just interesting how those things go, isn't it? Just interesting how those go. I'll have to get an update from my boy Zyrene, who made like a massive... I'll give him credit. At least he actually gave his reasons, if you remember why he thought Hauntzer were the best. But like, never really gave me an update on that one. Still waiting for that. I don't know. He probably just got lost in the mail or something, you know. Whatever.
Yeah. Talking about Someday though, like this.
I won't reference any jungle article that I want an update on as well. But you know, we don't talk about that anymore. Keep going. Someday, yes.
Yeah. Someday has had a phenomenal split, and when the 100 Thieves were looking their worst this split, he was the guy that was dragging them out of the dumpster.
Yes.
Playing stuff like Jax, Camille. Like he's had like an absolutely great split. And
that's why I got so triggered by, as you saw by when I did that column, when people just kept going on about Cody's son, and I was like, I'd love to be a fucking AD carry with Afromu as my support player and like the best front line in the fucking game, just like keeping everyone off my face. Like, that's the dream.
Yeah, I mean, this guy, even when he's on Cho'Gath, I feel like he impacts the game so much more than other top laners when they're on Cho'Gath. Not just like in lane, but in team fights and in the mid game, he's just really smart player, very intelligent, and like Warner Thieves did a really good job signing him. To be honest,
yeah, for sure. He has the. I don't know if you feel the same. Is we called it when we were casters, we called the Marin buff on Maokai because Marin was Maokai main 2015, right? He was like Marin Maokai has 10k HP more, right? Just a passive. Right? When he plays Mundo or Cho'Gath, you always feel like some days is just 1v9ing the game alone, and when he plays a carry, it's like you feel it. When you scrim against them, you feel like this guy is insane laning, good decisions, never makes a bad back. He has always like the good items, the right moments. Always has the jungler. If the jungler can't be there, he knows how to lose like a wave or two gracefully and bounce back by making a TP play, proactive play. This guy, instead, like if you compare him to any top laner in the league, he has all the tools. This is the only top laner that has all the tools: tanks, carries, TP plays, lane split pushing, team fights. He can do every style that the top laner could do. For me, he carried one of the Thieves. He carried on the Thieves the whole split. It was not the case in spring, but summer for sure, he carried one of the Thieves.
Yeah, I think like people might look at his stats and be like, oh, his CSD at 10 isn't that high, but this guy doesn't have high CSD.
I appreciate
stats.
The deepening of the voice anyway. Continue.
This guy doesn't have like high CS stats because he is losing the lane gracefully, because he doesn't really get much resources from his jungler because he's such a rock for the team. And then because he doesn't get many resources from his team, he loses gracefully. And
it's just not a point, to be skipped over. I wish so many more players understood that concept.
Yeah, like he's like what Huni could be if Huni wasn't so stubborn, I think.
If he'd had more hugs when he was a kid and everyone said, you're good enough as you are, you don't have to prove anything.
Yeah.
He was like, no, I'll... The problem with Huni is he's one of those people who watched Naruto and thought it was actually like a blueprint to life. And it's like, no, I have to prove to everyone by being the best ever that actually they were wrong about me. It's like, mate, just fucking calm down, have a cup of tea, just meet some friends or something, Have you ever watched Eat, Pray, Love? I haven't actually. It just sounds like the sort of movie that you should recommend in that scenario. So I should probably get my own references right. It's also quite dated. It's about 5 years old now, isn't it? Anyway, right. What about this then? So since that series was basically fucking garbage anyway, and everyone knew going in nothing was going to happen. What about this? In the semi-finals, we have the matchup that was the final last time around. It's 100 Thieves versus Team Liquid. Now, Team Liquid, considering in theory they're still the best NA team, it's not like they've gone without criticism. Still had sometimes the split where they looked a bit dodgy. I've heard, for example, some people say that they actually think the flaw in Team Liquid is having like both Impact and Pole Belter, because then you've got two players who aren't really going to be like the carry threat, and it just becomes one-dimensional. That it's like, especially in this meta, like it's double-lift. He's going to have to be the guy, and everything's set up around him. Is that? Do you ascribe to that, Empyre?
Yeah, when this TL roster was announced, I tweeted, "This team is CLG, but with Impact, like with like a tank player, basically. Like this, CLG, like when Doublelift was on CLG in season 5. This is the CLG team with a tank top player, and take that as you will. And what I meant was that this team is one-dimensional. They like Doublelift is the star player, the hard carry. They are going to play around Doublelift only. Impact is always going to be on a tank, and when he's not on a tank, he's not going to be performing very well. Team Liquid is not going to be performing well. Pole Belter is always going to be on a scaling mage, on that Malzahar, the Orianna.
That's also like, he's my original Cody son who I used to get triggered, because it's like the praise for Pole Belter only comes, just like with Cody's son, relative to if his team's winning the game. And then if they win the game, people just use like some fucked up logic, like, well, he must have carried because he's a mid laner. It's like, that doesn't work. So the thing that triggers me the most about that as well is it's like, if Pole Belter was that good, I think pretty sure we would have seen it by now. Like, how long am I going to wait?
Yeah, I mean, it's just like you said in your video about Pobelter. It's like when you have carries in the other positions, Pobelter is going to do his job, and he's going to allow that team's play style to flourish.
Yes.
And yeah, basically, like this is just TL. Like they just play around bot lane. They empower bot lane. They send their resources bot lane for dives, for ganks, etc. Jungle pressure vision, and then the mid game Impact is going to sack the side lane and go mid, and they're going to team fight for an objective, and they're going to win the team fight, and that's how they win games. It's very one-dimensional, and as we saw, like internationally, it's not very effective because it's like people are going to know what you're going to do, and it's very predictable. So even though it's not good internationally, it's still a strong strategy because they have strong players, they have strong, solid players all around, and it's gonna work very well in NA.
Like, I think my dream, someone please make this team. I want you to make a team. It's going to be top lane Haunter, jungle Contracts, mid lane Pobelter, AD carry Wild Turtle, and then I think, no, actually Wild Turtle actually has some like playmaking. AD carry Hjarnan, and then I want support player, had to be Adrian, won't it? Like, that's got to be, based on all of that I've read, based on my reading of history throughout Reddit, condensed down into positions. That's basically the best team you could ever make. And all those players are going to carry the fuck out of this game. Coached by Weldon Green, with assistant analyst Path from Worlds, week 2. There we go. Only week 2, though. Yeah. Only week 2. Yeah, exactly. You have to get him in that mindset, you know. You have to, basically, for him, like, every day would be waking up and we're like, it's week 2. Pick the games quick. Oh, what should Haunter play? Oh, I don't know. Jace. Shit. Oh, I didn't mean that. Oh, I didn't mean Jace. No. So anyway, I don't know how I'd recreate that. So I guess it'd be like that fucking Black Mirror episode. You know, the one where it's called, like, what's it, like, White Bear or something? You know, the one where they make that woman live through the same day over and over. It's like a horror show. Anyway, watch the episode. It was in last season. It was like 2 seasons ago, season 3 or what, season 4. Anyway, Zaboutine.
Alternatively, Groundhog Day.
Not bad, yeah. No, but the problem is that has a good ending, though. This would definitely have a really dark ending like that, where he never gets out of it. And at the end, he's just left, like, almost like Dante from Clerks, just saying, like, I wasn't even supposed to be here today. That's like Path's ending at every episode. So, and then he wakes up the next day. It's week 2 again, Path. What are you going to do? There's no pressure or anything. So anyway, Zaboutine. What do you think of Team Liquid?
I think Team Liquid has shown very strong performance before the change of the ADC, and then went for a big struggle. And even though they were very strong before the revamp of ADCs, we showed in the international stage that, you know, Doublelift is pretty easy to beat when you're Uzi or JK Love or any top world ADC, top world bot lane. Because the first thing that stood up from Team Liquid this year is the dual lane doesn't work. No matter how hard you want to try to phrase that it's going well, they discuss together, they try to improve, it's not working right. Doublelift Ole has never been the thing that we expected. I saw Codison and Ole doing pretty well against I think it was Prey and Gorilla last year in Worlds. And I felt like Ole is very strong, very, very strong support. It's just the mentality of the team, or it's ADC doesn't suit him. I think he's like a genuinely nice guy and doesn't like being pressured. And Doublelift is this kind of very hard mentality. We go, we win, we fight. So I'm pretty sure it's not working well. That's the first thing. I don't think the dual lane is that strong. And on top of that, Team Liquid is a team that doesn't play through mid, doesn't respect the roam, doesn't deep wards, doesn't cover the bases when they make a play, and they just hope for the things to go. They just like leverage on their raw talents. The thing is, they used to have the best talent pool in NA in Spring Split with one of the Thieves, and the final was only ADC meta. It was the MSI meta. It was the best ADC wins, and Doublelift is by far the best ADC among the two teams. Now, I think the first thing is I don't think they have the biggest talent pool anymore. I think Cloud9 is better in terms of laning all around, and I think TSM can match them. And on top of that, ADC is not central, even though it's very important, so it's very hard for them to snowball. And they have a limitation on tanks top, even though the meta is tank top, so they can be countered by some death. So I see one of the Thieves having a much better shot at winning. I'm not saying they're going to win, but I think it's easy to understand how Team Liquid is going to play, and you can counter it. Therefore, it's like a good soccer player, right? You know what they're going to do. It's still hard. Like Messi, you know what he's going to do, and you can defend it. That's pretty much the same with Team Liquid. It's going to be hard, but I see one of the Thieves being able to beat them. Empyre smiling.
I think TL still has the better
because of Xmithie, right?
I mean, Xmithie, and I think also the meta right now, you can go for those 5v5 scaling comps. 100 Thieves kind of did it. They played Tristana bottom, and they played tank top, and tank jungle, and mid was like Rise. I think that's what I'm going to expect Doublelift to do. He's going to pick Kai'Sa or Tristana, and they are going to put a mage mid, and then they are going to get to the point where it's like 5v5 team fighting, and I think TL are going to be better in that aspect. And then I think Team Liquid versus 100 Thieves, TL has the better early game because of Xmithie, like you mentioned, and Xmithie is going to get Doublelift ahead. And if Doublelift is ahead of Cody-san, I don't see 100 Thieves being able to contest a Team Liquid that has their ADC ahead. Because I feel like it's really hard for the enemy team to win if in NA if Doublelift is ahead and Team Liquid is ahead.
I have a couple of questions about this matchup, because I feel like we just had the Misfits G2 series where we had Perkz picking things like Rise, and then Schalke countering with Malzahar. And I feel like if something like that happens in TL versus 100 Thieves, like we'll see Ryu pick Rise and Pobelter counter with Malzahar, and this will be like very comfortable because both of these players have somewhat limited wheelhouses, but that I feel like those are like, if you think about Ryu, you think about Rise. If you think about Pobelter, you're thinking about Malzahar. And so I think that could be a really interesting matchup where if 100 Thieves don't get a strong like mid-late game side laning mid laner, they don't look as strong as like in the team fighting variation of 100 Thieves is more reliant on Cody-san, I feel. So at that point, we're in a position where, you know, if Rise is denied, then there are more openings for Team Liquid, but at the same time, Team Liquid might just want to take that gamble and give up the Malzahar. Ultimately, though, I think this should be a Team Liquid favored match, just because I think Team Liquid has more tools for putting 100 Thieves into team fights where they won't be necessarily as comfortable as Team Liquid will be. And this is North America, where eventually you just give up and everyone runs mid and it's agreed upon. And this has been decided like at the start of the match, like 30 minutes in, we are going to fight at Baron. This is what's going to happen. It doesn't matter what the sidelines look like. Fuck the minions. Who cares? So I think that in that type of scenario, it should be very Team Liquid favored.
Yeah.
I also think we've seen Misfits and other teams play super hard to bot and have success with that, even if their mid lane is giving up giving up pressure the way that the Team Liquid would like to do. So I think that could still be effective. So
yeah, I think the X factor is probably Someday, but I think TL, the way they play, are able to contain Someday.
I mean, isn't like Impact basically the closest thing to Someday anyway?
Yeah, but Someday can play carries very well, but I don't think 100 Thieves are going to go for carries. I think if they go for carries, they're doomed, because if they go for carries, they're not going to play around Someday, and Team Liquid is going to get an early game lead, and then they just end up with a better 5v5 team fight. So I think it's going to be tank versus tank every game.
Yeah. Game's going to come down to like 38 minutes. Cody-san's going to be in a team fight. He's going to miss position, get caught, killed. Reddit will finally blame him.
Yeah, like
TSM will have lost in the other semi, and I'll have a good day. So.
Yeah, like this series for me is Xmithie versus Anda and Doublelift versus Cody. And I'm going to pick Xmithie and Doublelift every time.
What do you think of the way that Anda has actually played in the 100 Thieves?
I think they were much better with Meteos. talking to Lyra and talking to other teams, it's like with Meteos, he's just a lot smarter about how he plays the early game, and with Anda, it's really amateurish, similar to the other NA rookie junglers. He just plays to he plays for like aggression and ganks. It's not very team based focused, which is what I think Meteos excelled at. And I think it actually helped 100 Thieves more when they had Meteos, because 100 Thieves want to play towards objectives and vision and putting the enemy in an awkward situation. And I think the way that Meteos plays was really good for them.
What's your judgment, Kelsey?
Regarding Anda versus Meteos, or?
Yeah, or just Anda in general.
Yeah, I think that they feel like they have a higher ceiling with Anda, so it might be kind of like the Equifax roster change, but Meteos just has a better understanding of where he should be on the map at a certain time, like what wards he should put when he needs to gank mid in order to contest something, when he needs to put to secure priority before he goes for X. And Anda is kind of a bit more lost in that regard. So in that sense, like, he doesn't have as much. I don't necessarily always agree with Smithy's plans, or I think that Smithy is like the smartest pathing jungler ever. But Smithy always seems to have a clear objective in his mind that he plays to as a jungler, and a lot of times that can be the best thing that you can do as a jungler. And I don't think Anda has that. I think Anda is still finding his feet in a lot of ways. So in that regard, I think that if I were Team Liquid, I'd be much happier facing a 100 Thieves with Anda than a 100 Thieves with Meteos. So.
Because the thing that I find concerning is, I mean, I noticed, right, when we talked about Team Liquid, when we talked about Cloud9, like Zaboutine made the extension of like projecting forwards, like the trajectory, what would happen if they're at Worlds. We didn't do it for 100 Thieves, and I have to say, 100 Thieves is probably going to make it to Worlds, but I actually think it'd be better for them if they fucking didn't. Because if they go to Worlds, I think they're going to get their shit pushed in so hard early game. They're never going to get to do any of this stuff. There's never going to be any like clever fucking, oh, look at what we did here, this read we made, or we played off this bit of vision. Like, you're never going to get to do that. Like, I'd love to see the top Chinese teams against the 100 Thieves. I think it'd be a fucking bloodbath.
Actually, I think this is the thing in NA LCS right now. I think teams have ups and downs, right? And I don't like the teams with the ups that look the strongest are not, for instance, the one in semi-final right now. I think Echofox at the top, it's much stronger than most of the teams. Cloud9 is. For Team Liquid must be one of them. But for instance, I think Thieves has a ceiling as a team with the roster they have. I don't see, for instance, FlyQuest has a ceiling as well. I think there is a lot of teams that are not playing the way it should be, and the game the way it should be, and it's pretty hard. It's going to be pretty rough. I think this is going to be the worst year of NA at Worlds. I actually think it's going to be very tough for NA this year.
It's a bold statement, especially since there is no week 2 this time in group stage. So
exactly, yeah. They even tried to shorten the format to give them a chance.
Yeah, I think the teams that I'd like to see from NA are Cena and Echofox, because it's only going to be that 1 week, and Worlds is a lot about figuring something out and before your enemy does, and you end up surprising them, and you can pull out upsets. And I feel like Echofox and C9 are the current teams that can be a bit creative and can be a bit aggressive and flashy, and that can upset some of these international teams.
Okay, right. As a closing topic, right. Obviously, I'm not putting you on the spot here just so like you make some outrageous statement. But since we've got the last 4 teams, who do you think will actually win this LCS? Just give me like a basic answer and then a simple reason. You don't have to go too in depth because you don't even know what the final is going to be like. You don't even know who's in the final yet. So you don't have to go too crazy. And I will say it's a pretty bold prediction, whatever you say at this point in time. It's tough to know. There's no clear favourite. So who's your money on?
So for me, I think Team Liquid, because if I think that TSM is going to beat Team Liquid, then I think if I think TSM is going to beat Cloud9 in the semis, then I think TL matches up well versus TSM. because TSM isn't proactive in the early game, and it's going to give TL the opportunity to play the way they want to play, which is get doublelift fed, and then they end up they're just going to play out the game traditionally and close out versus TSM.
I'd say TSM, unfortunately.
Wait a minute, did you just pick Cloud9 to be super fucking good? What?
Yeah, I know. I just I want Cloud9 to win. Sure. I think they're going to win, right? Yeah. But I think, it's always a big disappointment TSM wins at the end, and this is the thing. But yeah, objectively, I think Cloud9 and Team Liquid, even though I say Thieves might have a chance, they split, you changed my mind. I think you're right. I think Team Liquid will win. It's stronger team among the two. I think it's going to be a Cloud9 versus Team Liquid, and Team Liquid should win against Cloud9 because Team Liquid has more experience. But all these scenarios just, shrink and TSM will win, and then they say we told you so.
Wins out.
Yeah, exactly. The narrative, and Thorin will be like mocked, Thorin, exactly. you should talk TSM this spring, and look, they're stronger. Yeah, this is how it's going to happen. So yeah, ping me for a new show when they will win and go to Worlds, and all the fans will have the big hopes of TSM winning the whole thing. This is what I want to see.
Right, you finally become an NA resident. Well done. That was the final part of your naturalization process. Just picking NA TSM to win cause TSM. Right, Kelsey, who are you picking?
To win all of NA? Yeah. I think Team Liquid. So, I just think that they the thing is it's so weird. It's just that Team Liquid haven't changed that much, and they've kind of stuck to whatever. They had a couple of games where Vlad was pulled out or whatever, and we don't like to remember those games. But for the most part, Team Liquid have just kind of played and refined their strategy, and their strategy at least works in NA. We already know that. So
the meta suits their strategy right now,
and I think they have the best shot of taking it. So
this video was kindly supported by Dean Tanglis, Gardner Wilson, Andreas Snazore Westerlund, Alex Adams, Eddie Wingfors, Daniel Yordanov, Robert Baxter, Travis Greb, Kyla Harris, James Harding, Caesar, and special thanks go out to Matt Shakowski and Jerky's Minion in particular. Want teasers for my upcoming content? How about asking me a question for my monthly AMA? Do you want to take part in a discussion about esports with me? How about suggesting a topic or a guest for my content? Put your money where your mouth is and join the Scrilluminati today.